All right, so we're going to begin the Iowa City Council work session for Tuesday, November the 6th, 2018. So just for background, I want to state a couple facts. On the 4th of September, we condensed the second and third readings concerning the rezoning of 12 Court Street, and we voted unanimously, 6-0, that is, to rezone that site from RM44 to RFC SD. So our task now is to begin clarifying our views with regard to the possible provision of height bonuses for the site. So it's my understanding that in just a minute, Ann and Danielle, are both of you going to do it? In just a minute, Ann and Danielle or just Danielle? Yeah, sorry, thank you. Will provide us with background information, and if I state this incorrectly, just correct me when you come up, okay? Background information about, first, what the Riverfront Crossings District Master Plan calls for in this area, a little bit about how that plan was developed. Secondly, what the Riverfront Crossings District's form-based code calls for in the area and how that code was developed. And thirdly, what the form-based code calls out, identifies as possible justifications for height bonuses. Right, okay, good. So before Danielle begins, I want to express my own doubt that one work session will provide us with sufficient time to work through the topic. I can explain that if you want. I have like 4 reasons why I believe that to be the case. But rather than waste time going through them, I just want you to know I think it's pretty doubtful we'll be able to get through it. I might be proved wrong, and if that's the case, dandy. For now, however, let's turn things over to Danielle. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor. Welcome, Council. I think when I've been in Danielle Sitzman, NDS, what I've been invited to do is kind of set the table for your discussion of this property, and I hopefully will get through my presentation in about 15 minutes, leaving you plenty of time to do that. As the mayor indicated, we're going to cover a couple things tonight. I've kind of laid them out in this outline. First, I'm going to go through kind of the background and basics of the comprehensive plan or the master plan for this district and the creation of the form-based code, which is its implementation. Then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the development process, specifically in bonus heights, and then I'm going to bring it down to the level of this particular property so that you can have the information at your fingertips for that discussion. So getting started, I'm going to kind of go quickly at the beginning here and slow down as we get farther in. There is a comprehensive plan adopted for this district. It's called the Downtown and Riverfront Crossings Master Plan. It's what we would consider a district plan. It builds on a previous plan adopted in 2013 for the Riverfront Crossings area, and as you can see, actually led to the adoption of the form-based code in 14 with some amendments in 16. Similar to other comprehensive planning efforts, the master plan started with
Danielle, excuse me. If it takes you 17 minutes, you're okay. I think you need to slow down.
Sure.
Because we have several new council members up here. And
there will be a section about this particular property and the comprehensive plan again at the end, drilling down kind of more into the details of it. But big picture, high level is where I'm kind of starting with this. So like I said, other comprehensive planning efforts, it's going to start with a good comprehensive plan is going to start with the context. So looking at the location in this instance, the existing natural features like floodplain, green space, and topography, the built environment, and then specifically in this planning process, emphasizing more the development potential and the market analysis that was explored for the district. It did include a robust engagement strategy that included a variety of ways for the consultant that worked with us to engage our community stakeholders. Kind of started off with an assessment workshop, day-long event with staff and key stakeholders, including residents, property owners, business owners, and developers. There were some specific one-on-one interviews conducted. Also, there were 2 visioning workshops held in the evenings, open to everyone and the general public. One focused on the downtown and one focused on the West Riverfront area. That activity included strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, format analysis, and some voting activities, which you can see here in some of the folks participating in that. I said there was also a market analysis analysis conducted, specifically looking at housing and office market potential, the supply and demand in the area and the potential challenges for development of those two types of uses. And then there was a 3-day-long design charrette, which is a fairly unique feature to this particular planning process, and it merged the results of the previous engagement activities through a kind of, if you're familiar with design charrettes, kind of an iterative process where those ideas are tested and kind of reevaluated and developed through a consensus process. Over 100 people participated in that design charrette, which is a significant commitment of time from our community. We really felt like that was a good process to have gone through, and what really gave credence to the vision that was developed through that process. The result of the process was a framework of elements to be explored and described in the master plan. They're listed here on this slide. They range from transit opportunities for multiple modes of ways for people to get around, public art, student housing, natural space, and green features. And those framework elements really then led to the master plan goals. The goals of the plan were based on, like I said, that community visioning process, really focused on preserving the best of downtown and building upon its strengths, making the riverfront crossings area complement to downtown, making good use of the Ralston Creek in the area, and planning for several modes of transportation like biking and walking and even passenger rail. And so, as with other comprehensive plans, there's usually a map that you can refer back to. The master plan had a large map like this one that knit it all together, but then in each sub-district of the area, there are finer details. So in this map, what is somewhat unique to this is that there's the white-black massing of the buildings kind of showing in 3D the redevelopment potential throughout the district. The implementation of that vision, in this case, was a form-based code. A form-based code is intended to realize more of a mixed-use, pedestrian-oriented development style. A form-based code includes specific standards for the placement and forms of buildings, their use, a little bit about use, but mostly about the form of the building rather than regulating the uses inside of the building. So it's going to talk about, like I said, building heights, sizes, placement on the lot, frontages, setbacks, and things like that, as well as parking. A form-based code is really a beneficial way to go about implementing a mixed-use district. It's kind of a marriage of several kinds of tools. It's one tool to do both a calibrated and customized implementation for your city. It mixes together both the intent to have a design control over your area. So like I said, the forms of the buildings are regulated, but also encouraging a mix of uses, so not too much regulation or separation of uses. Hopefully, form-based codes are intended to realize higher residential densities, better mix of uses, as I said. Mix of uses helps reduce vehicle miles and reap other benefits that we generally are trying to achieve in our planning efforts here in the city. Requiring less land for parking because there's less demand for driving, and then also through redevelopment, increasing property values and tax base. The master plan itself did identify 8 sub-districts. It included the downtown. 7 of those sub-districts were then incorporated into the form-based code and further refined in the form-based code, those areas. So they're named here. You have the South Downtown, the University District, Central Crossings, Gilbert District, Park, West Riverfront, and South Gilbert. So slow down a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the development process and Bonus Heights specifically. I put this slide together hopefully to help visualize the development process. Some of you are visual learners like myself, hopefully. As you look at the slide, if you look from the left side of the slide to the right, it's going to lay out the development process. And so the text that's highlighted in red is the part the City Council would typically have some participation in. On the left-hand side is the general process of land development, including annexing land or making it part of the city, assigning a zoning class to it, subdividing it in some way. Those steps can be combined. In some cases, there might be separate steps that a development goes through, but generally all land development is going to go through most of these steps. Height bonus is somewhat specific specific to this district. And you'll see that the black arrow there diverts to the middle column. So in a project in the form-based code district, if there were no height bonus, it would continue on through this process. But if there's a height bonus request, it gets diverted to a separate design review process. And that's, you're probably familiar with level 1 and level 2 design review. So that center column is the level 1 design review. A level 1 design review is something that's administratively done by staff. So the center column would be what staff would be working on with the height bonus request up to a certain limit. So there's a staff committee called the Form-Based Code Committee. It would review such applications using both the master plan and the form-based code standards. That group, on which I am a part of, we have the authority to grant up to 2 stories of height above base maximum heights. And I'll talk a little bit about base heights and bonus heights to kind of clarify those, but just try to keep in mind at this point that 2 stories is up to 2 stories can be approved through a level 1 design review. So that if that were the case, once that design review is completed, the process would revert back to the left column and go through the remaining more administrative steps, so site plan review and building permits and then eventual construction. If in that design review there are more than 2 stories in height being requested, then it would get kicked over to the 3rd column, which is a level 2 design review, and does, as the red text indicate, includes city council in that approval process. So what that would usually entail would be staff doing a review of the project, summarizing and then forwarding on a memo to city council for consideration. So there are some other instances where it's not just the height that would trigger a review by city council. It's also a specific basis for the height request. So requests that are based on historic preservation transfer, public right-of-way transfers, or any open space transfers are also automatically reviewed by city council. So once city council would have the chance to comment, make a decision on that bonus request, then after that, the process would go back to the more staff administrative reviews of the final steps there. I think that's all I want to tell you about that one for now. It is important to understand that those bonus requests in that level 1 and level 2 design review are not a by right standard. They don't automatically trigger just because you've requested them. They all have to go through an evaluation process, whether it's a staff level 1 or with city council at level 2. There's some basic criteria that have to be met. Basically, the request for the extra bonus in height has to be justified by some sort of public benefit. And in our code, we've spelled out in general what a public benefit would be and what we would expect to see in any application, regardless of the request. So staff would look to the goals expressed in the master plan to inform our review of applications with these 4 standards. They relate to things like building and site design, quality of materials, and the way the project contributes to the character and quality of the neighborhood. There are 10 bonus types included in the form-based code district. There are other bonus types elsewhere in our code, so there may be some other ones that you've seen, but these are the 10 specific to the form-based code district. They're open space, historic preservation, public right-of-way, office space, public art, green or energy efficient building design, student housing, hotel space, workforce or affordable housing, and elder housing. They are structured in a way that some of them have prerequisites that must be met in order to be even considered. So for example, the city wouldn't accept a right-of-way dedication for an area where we don't want or need a street. So that would be a prerequisite for a street. They also do have some requirements for them. So if they're calling out, say, for example, office space, it's to be a certain caliber of office space, Class A. It has to be located on an upper floor, for example, and it could not include residential. So that second column includes kind of the requirements of each one of those. And then there's a way to calculate the bonus. So if it's based on square footages, there's an explanation of how those square footages would be calculated. If it's a ratio, for example, with office space, you get 2 floors for every 1 floor of office space. Those are defined. The energy and green building standard actually has a gradation of possible awards built into it. And then finally, there is in some cases, a limit on the number of floors that could be awarded through each type of bonus. If there's no limit, it's specified here. If there is a limit, there's a number in the column. So for example, for public art, the most you could get is 1 additional floor through a donation for public art. So I mentioned that there's something unique in the form-based code as well with height. What we've, as staff, refer to base height and bonus height. I'll walk that through that for you. In most zoning districts, there's a maximum height. It just is maximum building height. In this district, there's actually 2 areas in the district that require a minimum height, which is somewhat unique. As well. The intention of a minimum height is to kind of create a enjoyable space at street level, and buildings are part of that public space. So ensuring that there's a minimum height to create that pleasant effect at the ground level for a pedestrian. There are upper floor step backs required in different districts and at different heights depending on the overall building height, and then bonuses. So this slide here shows the base maximum height. So later we'll be talking about the South Downtown District, which is the area shown in red, and that 8 there indicates that the maximum base height is 8. So if you were to apply for no bonuses, the maximum height of your building could be 8 stories. When we talk about bonus height, then there's also a maximum there. The maximums are built in for a cap where bonuses would otherwise have no cap. So like I said, in that of the 10 bonus potential bonuses, there are some that a developer could apply for up to an unlimited amount. This would apply a cap on those amounts. So in the red district here, the South Downtown, the max bonus height is 15 stories. Again, if it's 2 stories or more, it could be a level 1 staff design review, or 2 or less stories. If it's more than that, then it goes on to a level 2 design review. So this map shows all projects in the riverfront crossings. So then the question is, where have bonuses been applied? So if we take out the smaller scale retail only, the map starts to look something like this. You have the projects that have occurred that are mixed use, housing, or hotel. Of those projects, the ones highlighted in yellow are the ones that have applied for bonus height with the City Council Level 2 design review. So that includes 316 South Madison, the Tate apartment building, the Rise, Hyatt Place Hotel, and the Hilton Garden Inn. So there are 14 projects overall that have been approved in the riverfront crossings. These are the 4 that have requested bonus height through a level 2 design review. Only 3 of these have actually been built using that bonus height that was given, but I'll get to that in a second. This is a summary of those 4 projects, their addresses and what sub-districts they were in. 3 of the projects were in the South Downtown District. That would be the 316 South Madison, the Rise, and the Hilton Garden. 1 of the projects was outside of that district in a separate sub-district called Central Crossings, and that would be the Tate Arms apartment. This table shows you the base maximum height and the total height that was awarded and the bonus that they used to get there. And I'll go through these individually so you can get a little more detail. The first project was called The View. It's at 316 South Madison. This is the project that was not actually built to its full bonus height award. The photo on there, the elevation on the left is the proposal that was made and that was granted bonus height. The elevation on the right is the elevation of what was actually constructed. This came through in November of 2014 for a level 2 design review with City Council. They were requesting their bonus height based on student housing, provision of student housing, and meeting the prerequisites and requirements of the student housing bonus section, as well as the green building or efficient building design standard. They were to construct it to a LEED Gold standard. They were approved. They did apply, and they were approved for those 7 additional stories. However, it was not constructed to that. The second project to apply for Level 2 design review was later, January 2015. As I said, this was for historic preservation credit. In this case, The building on the left was constructed with one additional floor due to a transfer of development potential from the building on the right, which is the Tate Arms building. In exchange for landmarking the Tate Arms building as an Iowa City Historic Landmark, the owner of the building was able to generate about 35,000 square feet of development potential. 7,400 square feet of it, like I said, was used to the building to the left to add one additional story. That did go to City Council simply because it was on that list of items that must come to City Council, not because of the number of stories of height.
How many floors does the 35,000 square feet translate to?
It was one story,
Okay.
or it was part of one story.
Rockne, do you mean at the site?
I'm not saying at the site, but how much it would transfer? Weren't they able to transfer some of the development rights?
So what they transferred was the 7,400.
Okay.
So they have some ability to transfer more in the future to another project, should they so choose. The third project came through in September 2015. This is the Rise on South Lynn Street. It's a underground parking with 2 towers rising above it for housing and hotel. It's on a sloping site, so different parts of the building are exposed to different heights. It's anywhere from 12 to 15 stories. It's again in the South Downtown District with a maximum height of 8 stories, but they applied for the bonus height using the bonus category of hotel, high quality hotel. They requested and were granted 7 additional stories based on that hotel requirement. And the fourth project is the Hilton Garden Inn on South Clinton Street. That was September of 2015. Again, in the South Downtown District, where 8 stories are allowed by max base height. They requested and were granted 4 additional bonus stories for high-quality hotel space. So they were able to increase the height of that building as well.
You said they got 4 stories?
4 stories on that one, yep. And the last project is one that did not go to City Council because it was only a level 1 staff design review level project because it was only 1 additional story. This is the Breckenridge Apartments on Dubuque Street. During the design of the building, it was discovered because of the way we calculate heights and how we measure from ground level, that because of the sloping site and the design of this building, enough of the foundation on what would be the left side of this slide was exposed above ground to actually count as a story. So instead of having a 4-story building, this one was actually measured as a 5-story building. So in order to not have to redesign the building, the applicant applied for a bonus provision for public art. So they made a contribution to our public art fund, equaling 1% of their project value in exchange for 1-story bonus height. So they increased this one where the base maximum height was 4 stories. They were allowed to go to 5, technically just on that sloping end of the building. So I'm going to slow down a little bit more. I will tell you all of that information is available in some of these charts. So when we get to the end, if you want to see that again, I can just simply leave that one up on the screen. But talking specifically about East 12th Court Street now, that's the area, as the mayor said, was rezoned recently to a Riverfront Crossings District, the South Downtown District. It's outlined here in black. It's the location of the existing Pentacrest Garden Apartments. As I said, it's in the South Downtown District, which is shown here in the highlight. I'm going to step back now from form-based code back to the visioning process that, as I indicated, started all of this, and talk a little bit about the master plan. In the master plan, there are specific sub-district descriptions, including this area. It was identified as the South Downtown at that point as well. There's a section that deals with the objectives, the character, and the development potential for the South Downtown. The South Downtown was described through that process as the most urban district outside the downtown, and an extension of the downtown is to really enhance its urban form as such. It's mostly envisioned for residential and office with retail only at strategic locations. There were some visioning goals to bridge Burlington Street, seen as a divide in the downtown corridor, and to find ways to improve Burlington Street so that it was not a barrier for commerce and foot traffic between the downtown and this district. Also, objectives of leveraging Clinton Street as a mobility spine through the South Downtown District. I'm going to walk through this slide from left to right in the map. You can see there are little numbered cross sections here, starting with 4. So I'm going to go from left to right. The plan actually called out a development program for these areas specifically, so I'm just going to mention them here. The first one is the Capitol Street student housing area. So this is actually the area of the Pentecost Garden Apartments. Right here. So that's important to this discussion. It was identified as the Capitol Street student housing. It was the intention to break up the super block. A super block is a larger than usual block. So here you see these kind of square blocks as kind of the standard. In this area, there's a block that's much longer than that. So you wouldn't be able to, as pedestrian, travel these short distances to get where you're going. You'd have to go all the way around this thing. So the intention was to reconnect Capitol Street and break up that super block. It's also identified as an ideal location close to campus, and it was mentioned that additional height and density might be possible from what the master plan actually envisioned if parking could be accommodated underground on site. 1, 2, and 3 run up and down Clinton Street here. Clinton Street is identified as a key component of this subdistrict. Number 1 is identified as the Clinton Street Gateway. It's really the primary view into downtown from the Clinton Street corridor. At the time the master plan was being developed, the music building was still under construction, and as you know, the Hieronymus Square is now just under construction. But the thought was that these 2 new buildings would really create that gateway into something new and different. Then the length of Clinton Street was identified as a promenade. That would be a primary route between the downtown and the new Riverfront Crossing Park. It was reimagined as a promenade, as a more welcoming, pedestrian and bike-friendly and accommodating vehicles way to experience that corridor. The third area on Clinton Street is what is called the Clinton Plaza. This is framed by the courthouse here. The intention is to create a focal point, an outdoor space for community events in this kind of civic area, and to enclose this space with several new mid-rise buildings so that you really get a defined space here with some additional outdoor space. This was all before the post office changed use. The intention at the time the master plan was developed was that if there was redevelopment potential there, that it could significantly impact and improve that area. As you know, vision plans are long-term plans. We don't always see change immediately or in the direction that we expect, but the thought was that with the additional development that there could be an additional emphasis on that civic area as well. The other projects that are identified here are the city mixed-use parking facility, and then identifying Court Street as kind of the alternate circulator, ideally for bicycle traffic. I will just point out, as I said, that the comprehensive plan also had a market component study to it, and so in the same area, each of these kind of buildings was identified by number, by potential of stories and square footage, as kind of a rough estimate of the redevelopment potential throughout the corridor. So in this case, the 12 East Court would be buildings 3 and 4 and 6 and 7. Switching back over to form-based code. So this is no longer the visioning process. This is the rules and regulations that were adopted as ordinance to hopefully encourage private development, to come up with development proposals that that the master plan had envisioned. Much less sexy ordinance writing, but You'll see here there's standards for heights and setbacks listed out as specific criteria that have to be met. There are a host of other components to a form-based code, like I said, dealing with frontages and parking and forms and shapes of buildings and their entrances, their building materials, the size and shapes of windows. All those details are encapsulated in the form-based code. So again, just to reiterate, base and bonus height. We're talking about the red district here, which is the South Downtown. So the base maximum height by right is 8 stories. So with the rezoning in September, they were given the opportunity to go up to 8 stories. If they were to apply for a bonus, the cap on that bonus in this district would be 15 stories. And that cap would be reached through combination of or single use, depending on what bonus they applied for and if they have any caps. This property is a little bit different than other properties simply because of the conditions that were placed on it as part of that rezoning. So I'm going to go through those next. There were several conditions placed as part of the rezoning, which is fairly typical to have a conditioned rezoning. I'm not going to go through each and every one of those, but there were conditions placed about the phasing of the project, the timing of dedication for improvements to the street, the team of architects that would be working on this and their qualifications, a statement about affordable housing, which is a requirement, and then the 3 specific conditions that actually impact the development approval process that I'm going to walk you through. So the first one is a condition that the exterior design elevations obtain approval from the Planning Commission, and that if a level 2 design review is required for bonus height, the Planning Commission be involved by making a recommendation to City Council. So let's go back to this slide. This is the slide I showed you about the normal level 1 and level 2 design process, and so as it relates to bonus height. This first condition added in what you're seeing here in orange, so essentially inserting the Planning Commission into this design review process, regardless of bonus height, but then also if there is bonus that requires level 2, putting the Planning Commission over into that process as well. So that's what the first condition did. Then the 2 other conditions I want to point out have to do with conformance with the master plan. So there was a condition that was placed on this development that it would substantially conform to the building footprints shown in the Downtown Riverfront's master plan. So that's these 4 buildings that I've been pointing out. And that any significant deviation from that footprint would trigger a level 2 design review. And then also that a landscaped interior courtyard must be provided between the 2 easternmost buildings. So let's go back to this slide again. So you'll see here in orange, basically the additional requirement of City Council review if the deviations from the master plan are shown in the eventual proposal. And I think I'm going to end there so that you have time to discuss. I will say that I can bring up for you and leave on the screen the bonus height provisions if they're helpful to look at. I also do have the entire list of every project in the Riverfront Crossing. So I went through the ones in yellow and the Breckenridge Apartments. And in this category, you can see the comparison between the base height and what was built. So you can see additional heights. Basically, the ones in white did not require any bonuses, well, other than the Breckenridge. The other ones do not. And again, if it's helpful to see the development process laid out, I have those slides for you as well.
Can you quickly go back to the side that your next to last side?
Which
Yeah,
one?
that
This
one. I just wanted to make sure I was tracking what you were telling us.
Okay, sure. So would you like me to go through it again?
Sure.
So this condition required substantial conformance with the building footprints that are shown in the master plan. And so that would be the 4 buildings kind of fronting on Capitol Street with the footprints an L and some U shape around the street. And the other one is the landscaped interior courtyard between the 2 easternmost buildings being a requirement. They're unique to this approval, and so they would add into this approval process that if for some reason those are not shown in the proposal, they would trigger a level 2 design review by City Council to explain why.
Right, thank you. No doubt they would be, but I just wanted to make sure I was tracking what you said. Okay, great summary, Danielle, despite my interrupting you early on.
That's all right.
All right, we need to give our council members a chance to ask you any questions or seek or make any comments they feel they need to make with regard to what you've presented. Yeah, mainly about the Riverfront Crossings District Master Plan, what it calls for, the form-based code standards, what they call for, and so on, just the material that Danielle presented. So, does anybody want to ask questions?
I have a question. To get to 15, could you take a step-by-step what benefit the community gets as we get up to 15? I'd asked maybe an inartful question earlier about Tate Arms. I understand at least some of the floors of the 15 will be from Tate Arms. So could you break that down for us?
So it's going to depend on what the developer chooses to, how they choose to design their building. I don't know that I can tell you that there's a specific list of things they'd have to check off to get to, I'm trying to back up to the slide that showed the
Any one of those.
these things here.
Okay.
I mean, these are the basics that any proposal would be evaluated as far as, is it a superior design than otherwise? Staff would rely on the vision plan, the master plan, to go back and look at the goals and objectives of that and to see what the developer is proposing and how they would be accomplishing those.
Say they wanted to transfer from Tate Arms and Heights, how much could they add by virtue of Tate Arms?
So it depends on what the size of their floor is, but in the Rise, in the south tower of the Rise, which is the apartment component of the Rise, a floor is about 30,000 square feet of floor area. So they have about 28,000 square feet from Tate still to be transferred, so that might be a floor, depending on the size of their floor.
Depending on the size of the square footage.
Square footage of the floor, the layout of the floor.
Of the floors in, I suppose, 4 buildings.
And for historic preservation credits, it's a square footage transfer, so it's square footage to square footage.
How about the rest of you?
Danielle, is this site the only site in the master plan that's identified as ideal for student housing?
The South District is definitely the South Downtown District. So not this site only, but I think it's the South Downtown District in general is seen as close to campus and therefore more appropriate than other districts for student housing. I'm not as familiar with every section of the master plan, so I'm not sure I can tell you that it's not mentioned elsewhere, but it's specifically mentioned in the South Downtown District as appropriate for student housing.
And there are a couple of, just in terms of the form-based code as it applies to, just development that I wanted to ask. One is, what is the parking requirement?
I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer that one for you today. That's going to come from outside of the form-based code, and it's going to be based on bedroom count. And so depending on their mix of bedrooms, it would be based on that. There's some discounts that can be applied as well, but it depends on the development.
And is there a bedroom maximum per unit?
There's a percentage, 30%, 3 bedrooms or more cannot make up more than 30% of your total mix. So there's a limit on the number of larger bedroom units.
And is there a minimum unit size?
Square footage, that'd be controlled by the building code.
One other question I just recalled. You didn't show from the master plan, there was a building height diagram, which was under the development standards. Is there a slide of that, or is that just not part of the presentation?
It's not in my slide deck, so I'm not sure that I don't have that tonight. Yeah.
Because I think it's an important, personally, I think that's an important reference, because it's something that came up in our TIF discussions. It was a major issue when looking at the downtown. That building height diagram was kind of central to that discussion. And that diagram applies to this area as well. And it had specific building heights laid out for the area, and,
So this is what I do have in the slide deck, and this really goes to their market analysis as much as anything. And so it does
Right.
include building heights here.
I mean, what I will say is, what I saw there was, in the building heights diagram, was it was a reflection of the concept as represented here, in that the two the two corners of the buildings on the north end, where Capitol meets Burlington, were shown as anywhere from 7 to 15 stories. And then the remainder of the building area was 4 to 6 stories.
But did I see that there is 15-story where you have the red area? All of them say 15, or did I miss that?
That's the zoning code, which has a maximum height in it of 15, yes. So the
okay.
red district in the zoning code, which is this area, is allowed under the current zoning to go up to 15 with the
By the
bonus
zoning
heights.
code, okay.
And when you say zoning code, you mean the form-based code?
The form-based code is in our zoning code, yes.
Okay.
But the base height is 8. Right?
Right.
And, yeah.
So they can go 8 to 15 with a level 2 council
Review.
approval. When you talked about the conditions, the slide that the mayor had you go back to, I guess I'm a little, and it's the one to the bottom right, what is that condition actually referring to?
So in the master plan, the white building layout incorporated a courtyard. And so I think the intention of that condition was to tie the development to the master plan again, in the requirement that that courtyard, as shown in the master plan, be a component of the building design when it would proceed on.
So this is access, like just walking. Is that what I'm getting?
Right, a ground level, a green space.
Okay. Okay, all right. So if I understand this correctly, so the form-based code for this project specifically, according to it, it would just need, I mean, it's something that was decided, that it can go from 8 to 15 with a type 2.
Right. It would need
Approval.
to go through the process of a type 2 review. It doesn't guarantee the heights have to be granted. It's
Okay.
not a by right entitlement to those heights. It's simply the potential to propose a project that may be awarded those bonus heights.
Okay. But is it fair to say that it's all a part of like the master plan?
It's all a part of the zoning code.
Okay.
So whether height bonuses are provided depends on our judgment.
Yes.
And those bonuses would be given per building. It wouldn't necessarily be, say there were 4 buildings, all 4 buildings could get the 2 bonus. It would be 2 for each, 2 for this, 2 for that, 2 for
I
this.
think it would depend on how the applicant proposed their project, but for example, the Rise is one building, even though it has 2 towers because of the underground connection. So I think you would see one proposal come forward, and the bonus heights for all the towers of the project be requested at the same time. The applicant could, I suppose, choose to break them up and ask separately, individually at different times, but it could either be all at once or separately. But you would make a decision specific to a design proposal.
How many floors do we get from the right-of-way designation?
So we ran the numbers
Square feet.
earlier, assuming the same square footage of right-of-way that we had access to estimate earlier, it would be about 300,000 square feet that they could generate through a right-of-way dedication. So 38,000 square feet times the 8 stories of height that they now have in zoning. So if you divide that by a typical floor at the Rise, that's about 11 floors in that math.
That would be spread out over the 4 buildings?
Yeah, but again, there's no right
Right.
to that.
I understand that. I'm just
Bonus.
asking the question.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
asking the
about
question.
330, if you add it plus with the Tate, the remaining Tate arm height or historic transfer, they'd have about 330,000 square feet that they could transfer somewhere.
I'm going back to what John said. Is there another map that is just like the riverfront crossing, like height maps, or where did you see the height being designed in certain area, even though by the zoning it say 15?
Yeah, it was in the back of the master plan were a set of development standards, and one of those standards was a building height diagram. So it gave, what Danielle has been showing was kind of a very specific yield analysis for sites that are identified for development, which got into very fine-grained, detailed building heights recommended, again, based on the market analysis. It was all driven by that market analysis. So it was showing 4 and 7, with 7 on the corners of Capitol and Burlington, and the remainder of the project would be at 4 levels.
Even though Capitol Street will make it like all 4 are corners, or they put that in consideration on the new map, or before the Capitol Street like go all the way to Burlington, or?
I'm not sure I follow you, but
No, I mean like, I understand that you say the 2 corners that facing, what do you call it?
Burlington.
It will be facing Burlington.
Yeah.
But is that after Capitol Street has been like extended, right?
reopened, right?
Oh, because to me it's gonna be like 4 corners, or am I? No.
I think the design intent was, in some respects, similar to what we have recommended in the downtown, and that was that locate high-rises, buildings over 6 stories in terms of the kind of the categories of building height, locate the taller buildings on the corners. And so I think the concept here was, let's create a gateway effect as you're coming into riverfront crossings.
If you're high.
Go with a taller structure and then transition down as you get further south into the
see.
district.
Okay.
So the point I'm trying to make is that building height diagram gives some flexibility, in terms of the comprehensive plan, the master plan aspects of this project, in terms of understanding what building heights could be on any given location.
And you're definitely not referring to these 2 bird's eye images
Yeah,
right
these
here, huh?
bird's eye images are of the development yield scenario. So it's showing, you can see here, like on the image lower left, Burlington is on to the north or to the top of the image. You can see how the building complex that we're looking at pops up, right? And then the rest of the project is at that lower elevation or lower building height.
Okay, maybe you could provide us with that one image that John's referring to. That would be helpful. I'd like to ask you a couple questions, or ask you one question, then maybe ask other council members the other question. In prior conversations several months ago, our council discussed the extent to which the public had been involved in development of the form-based code, especially the height bonus part of it. Now, I know you weren't here, Danielle, so it's probably a bit awkward for you to try to answer this question, but can you enlighten us about how much the public was involved at that stage? I mean, we all agreed they were very much involved in the development of the Riverfront Crossings Master Plan. But I'm asking about this
Sure.
other thing.
I'm not sure I can answer that. I know that what I've seen, I mean, the typical process for enacting an ordinance for a zoning code would involve public hearings and presentations to the Planning Commission at which the general
And there
public
were,
would
yeah.
participate. So I'm sure that happened. I've read in the minutes that the Planning Commission discussed it extensively. I'm not sure I can comment on what beyond that might have been the public involvement in that step. I could certainly find that out for you and recount it.
I can jump in on that a little bit. We did go back and look at the minutes of the approval processes, and it definitely was multiple planning and zoning commission meetings. There was public input at those meetings that came in via email and at the, at the meetings themselves, but it certainly wasn't on the level of the master plan where there were charrettes and public meetings outside of a formal meeting setting. And then really quickly, just to get back to John's question, I pulled up the building heights diagram. I can't, unfortunately, throw it on that screen, but the corners of Court and Burlington are shown as 7 to 15 stories, and the balance of the site is shown as 4 to 6 stories.
And Jeff, we've had discussion about this map before, at least the downtown part of it, and I'm assuming it is the same for this entire thing, including riverfront crossings. And that discussion was that this map was not even vetted by the group that really was doing the comprehensive plan. I remember you gave us a memo a number of months ago, maybe even as much as a year ago, that this had kind of gotten put in by the consultant without really a vetting by staff or public involvement, if I have that somewhat correct.
We did do a memo to the EDC committee during the TIF policy review. I'm sure that there was some level of staff vetting. I don't know. I don't think it was very comprehensive, but it wouldn't have been in the plan without some level of staff vetting. We did go back and determine it really was not part of any public vetting process. We found an image of it on one poster board that was presented at a public meeting, but it was never incorporated into the PowerPoints or part of facilitated discussions with small groups and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a reasonable question, Susan, or a point to bring up. I think it would apply in general to the modest degree to which the public was involved in the process of developing and vetting the height bonus portions of the form-based code, including in that map that you just referred to, Susan.
Yeah, and I guess the only comment I would add to that is, I mean, the form-based code is the code, and we rely on the code in many, many situations, in every situation when we are rezoning. And so regardless of how much the public has chosen to be involved or not in terms of coming to planning and zoning meetings and hearings, when we've made changes to the zoning code, they've had that same opportunity with this, and regardless of the project, we always follow the code. So the reason I bring that up is I am getting the sense, and I felt this way in our previous conversations, that sometimes there's the effort to place more emphasis on the comp plan than on the code itself. And I think we have to keep in mind and in front of us what the actual code is as much as what the comp plan is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's the comprehensive plan, which included the building height diagram, is a way of, in my view, it helps inform how we think about implementing the code. For example, the code allows by right every building in the South Downtown District to be a minimum of, by right, 8 stories. I really doubt that anyone imagines that every building in the South Downtown District is going to be 8 stories. So there's the building height diagram gives us some idea of how that code requirement can be interpreted in a manner which gives us some idea of how to, kind of in a more urban design sense, for example, to think about where to place buildings at different heights.
You don't think it would go less than 8? You're just saying that it would be 8 or higher?
It could, if you look at what we've seen built, the Midwest One Bank building is, I believe, in the South Downtown District.
It's in the Central Crossings.
Is it? I just noticed there was a jog.
It could be. I don't have it in front of me, so.
I think it's safe to say, and Danielle has this list here, all those projects in white, with the exception of Breckenridge, are built at or below their base minimum. So you can go through and see where, the Crossings development, for example, down on South Gilbert by Big Grove, there was one instance there where they were allowed 6 stories and they only built 3.
Right.
Or they were allowed 6 stories and only built 5. So
Right.
yes,
Yeah.
I mean, it happens. People
It's
don't always build to the max.
Hieronymus, which is in construction at the corner of Burlington and Clinton, will be 7 stories. It's in the South Downtown District. I believe Midwest One Bank is in the South Downtown, and it's 6. So you can build up to 8, but there's no, it's not necessary to build up
If I
to 8.
recall correctly, Midwest One was built under the former code, not the
Oh, I
form-based
see.
code.
Right,
Yeah,
it's
that
not on the
sounds
list
right.
because it predates the
Okay.
form-based code.
So I want to ask our council members a question, which really is in part based on an email we received from a constituent, a member of the public. And the email reads, "No to additional floors allowed. 8 floors is more than enough." So I'm not agreeing with that particular person, but it does pose a question that we should at least address and answer, and that is, are any height bonuses necessary on this site to achieve the city's policy objectives? Do we need to grant any height bonuses to achieve our objectives? Now, we've already rezoned. It's eight floors by right. Another 2 floors would be authorized through the staff review process. So it's a generic question, but it really comes in part from the email we received from this resident of Iowa City.
I would say yes.
What's the question?
Sorry.
What was your question?
Do we need to authorize any height bonus for this site in order to achieve our policy objectives? Susan just said yes.
I'll give one specific example. I think, and we have coming before us this transfer of development rights. The developer in this case has square footage that they can transfer based on the preservation of Tate Arms building. If we start setting a precedent of offering transfer development rights for preservation, but the developers can find no place to go, they will not be using that as any incentive for historic preservation. And I'm just giving that as an example that, and I think that's a huge consideration as we look at that other issue. I think also from a policy standpoint for the city, I think we need more housing. I think we need more student-oriented housing close to the university. I think we've talked before about that taking pressure off the neighborhoods close to the university, and so in terms of our efforts on neighborhood stabilization. I could go on, but I'll just leave it at that. I do think there are reasons for city benefits, city policy benefits that warrant our serious consideration of height bonuses here.
So I would agree with you, Susan, about Tate Arms, just flat up, what's straight up. Yeah, so.
I would say yes as well.
Yeah, I think the most obvious opportunity with going taller than 8 is the transfer of development rights. It's something we've talked a lot about.
Danielle, can you show us the slide that contains the list of, 14 or 12, whatever it was, possible rationales for height bonuses? Thank you.
There are 10.
Thanks. You count better than I do. So if we think certain policy objectives can better be achieved by granting height bonuses, we need to be clear about what those objectives are. So what do we want to accomplish on this site? So we've got a list here. I can tell you the ones that leap out at me as being appropriate for some degree of possible height bonuses. Tate Arms, already mentioned. Possibly for the right-of-way, though I have a case I want to make about that, but there's certainly potential there. Also, student housing. I agree with Susan. We've talked about this before. Student housing on this site is crucial. Affordable housing is a requirement, but however many floors we permit has a bearing on how many affordable units there would be, either on-site or through payment in lieu of, and so on. So I don't want to just hog the limelight here. I'm wondering if, looking at this list, folks, which ones do you think are policy objectives that warrant detailed consideration of possible height bonuses for this site.
If I could make maybe more of a little bit of an extended comment, and cut me off, Jim, if we'll do that a little bit later, but I got to say, I think, yes, we need to go greater than 8, and I have major concerns in terms of how we've handled this process. I don't think that we should be taking and providing this amount of detail in terms of providing direction to staff in this particular case. Now, if we were talking about the downtown, I would feel differently about that, because I think the downtown is more of a space where there's a little bit more historic. But I think that we need to provide clear directions as to stories, and I would leave it to the discretion of staff in terms of how they want to get to those stories. I think for me, in terms of economic growth, we're talking about a $150 million investment. And we're also talking about potentially up to $4 million of tax revenue, county, school, and city. I do not think that we can afford to compromise that potential addition to our tax base. The second priority for me is jobs for our residents and our community members. We've talked a lot about aesthetics. We have not talked a lot about who's going to be building this project. This is going to be a major economic development growth project for this community. I think that we have had it adequately vetted, and I think it is. It does inhibit what we want to do if this process is that we don't have enough clarity in terms of what we want to do. So I think for me, we have the Tate Arms. We know that that's going to come. We know that we're going to have the transfer of the development right-of-way, and we're going to get significant benefit from that. As to the other objectives, student housing, that's already conditional, part of the conditional zoning agreement. So I just think we need to figure and focus more on the big picture here, and I'm comfortable with providing clear direction. I'm ready to make a decision in terms of where we go, which is 15 stories. Leave it to staff's discretion in terms of what they come up with. We're going to have the Planning and Zoning Commission is going to weigh in on this, and then it will come back before us. And finally, related to the public input, I don't see large numbers of the community outraged about this project. It's been on the agenda for 5 to 6 months now. There's been some feedback, but I don't think people are outraged in terms of what's being proposed. Some people are, but it has not been large numbers of people. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. I think we do need to do the 15-story at all 4, and we need to provide clarity and consistency and not make it so difficult to realize the benefits of the bonus height provisions.
I'll agree with you, Rockne. You kind of jumped ahead, and I appreciate that.
We disagree on some things, but I'm with you on this one.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you just said. You've talked about the things that I talk about a lot of time, the tax revenue, the people, the jobs that this will create in terms of the construction. I think the economic development, I think the neighborhood stabilization pieces that I've talked about. I think the design will come with a high-quality architectural firm that'll be working with the developers, with the design review that will come from P&Z. I think that when you look at the form-based code, it addresses this as a possibility. And even without looking, and I'm going to take just a second to go back, even if you go back and bear with me 1 second, if I can flip back to in the comp plan, page 52, because I think this is really important as we're talking about the comp plan versus the form-based code. And I'm almost there, bear with me, this hundreds of pages of document. This is in the introduction to the development opportunities, and again, this is on page 52 of the comprehensive plan, and it is even put in bold in this paragraph. It's even bolded. It says, it bears emphasizing the development opportunities identified on the following pages are conceptual in nature, Like their predecessors in previous planning efforts, their value is to identify visions and ideas for specific areas. Successful visions will endure, but details will change and evolve as projects are implemented. And I think that's really, really important because the form-based code starts giving us some of those details. And not every project, that height map, which we've talked a little bit about, I get concerned sometimes that we, fall into those as rigid. And again, I think this really, the fact that they even put it in bold print in here and emphasizing that these things are conceptual. And also on page 61, and Danielle mentioned this earlier, and I had mentioned it in the editorial I wrote in the summer, the plan also mentions, and specifically for this site, additional building height and density may be possible if parking demand is accommodated underground or off-site. So I'm with you, Rockne. I would like to see us maximize the density on this site. I will tell you I have some other conditions that I would want to talk about proposing if we go to the 15, and they have more to do with things like security and on-site maintenance and some of those issues. But from a general standpoint, I'm on board with you, Rockne.
I have a quick question for Danielle. I was wondering, with the student housing, it has management, design, and amenities as a requirement. What does that exactly entail of?
It's a large section, and it would have made my table out of balance. So that section actually has quite a few things that it talks about: security and management plan, certain amenities in the building that would be required. I don't have it in front of me, but there's a list of about 5 or 7 items specifically described that have to do with those requirements.
Okay, yeah.
So I want to disagree with Rockne and Susan, and then I don't know what the rest of y'all think. I'm sure you'll speak up. We've already upzoned the property 5-fold. We've increased the allowable density of development on that site by 5, by multiple of 5. This means the developer can go from a current roughly 200 beds to roughly 1,000 beds. Don't hold me to the exact number, but that's close enough. That upzoning would, in itself, increase the tax base dramatically from this particular site. That's a good thing. I support that. That's the reason I supported the upzoning in the first place. But both of you are focusing on the gross property tax revenue coming from this one site. You're not thinking about the net change in property tax revenue associated with off-campus demand for student housing. So let me give you a few facts I've uncovered here over the past several weeks. As part of an unrelated zoning, something that had nothing to do with this, we received a market assessment which reported that rental vacancy rates had increased to 4.4% in 2017 and was expected to increase to 7% by 2019 as a result of imminent completion of several new multifamily projects. So there's an increase in the vacancy rate out there that's taking place. That's one thing we hoped we would accomplish. We were hoping that would drive rents down, and we think that would be a good thing. But shortly before we rezoned the property, I had a lengthy discussion with a person who owns a substantial number of apartments in complexes. This particular person expressed considerable concern about the recent and projected increase in rental housing vacancy rates and drew my attention to the negative effects this is likely to have on the assessed value of his property and on others like his. So he said, think about the net effect, not just the gross increase in property tax revenue. We also received a letter from Larry Savota, the owner of Campus View Apartments. We got this before we did the rezoning. He pretty much said the same thing. So they have their own self-interest. We should recognize that. But I think they're also saying there will be some ripple effects of this particular project if we go to basically 2,000 beds in the site. Also, university officials have told us that there will not be a push in the near future to increase enrollment, and we know that the vacancy rate in Mayflower Apartments was down to something like 60%, not the vacancy rate, occupancy rate was down to about 60%, right about the time we upzoned. So we don't know really what's going to happen with student enrollment over time. So my main point here is we should be thinking also about net property tax revenues rather than just what would come from this one project. And we've already agreed to upzone it fivefold.
I think there's a lot more benefit here than just the tax revenue. I mean, Rockne mentioned that, and I said I agreed with him. And I agree there may be some decreases other places, but one of our huge priorities has been neighborhood stabilization and affordable housing. And I think this can assist us in going a long way in that as well. So to me, it's a lot more than just the property tax increase. And I agree. And there's no way to quantify what you're talking about, Jim, because we can't project how much those revenues may go down on other properties.
So having 1,000 beds on this site instead of 200 would go a long way toward stabilizing neighborhoods. And what was the other thing you mentioned?
Affordable housing.
And it would result in another 100 units of affordable housing, simply as a result of the upzoning we approved.
I don't think another 100 units. You're talking beds.
I meant beds. Yeah, thanks.
Well,
I slip back and forth occasionally.
They're not exactly equivalent, but yeah.
Yeah.
I, asked Kelly include my letter that I had prepared earlier this year, and it was in the packet, and it spoke to what my understanding of the master plan was and its basis in the market analysis, which I think was a really important aspect of the master plan, that it was a market-based, form-based code, with the intent being that development could be distributed throughout the district. In my mind, one of the most important measures of a plan like this, which is in effect to try to bring city life to the area under consideration, is what it will do to the street life and vitality of the district as a whole. So the idea was, given that market demand, how can we distribute it throughout the district to achieve that goal? So if you over-concentrate, and the sort of build out to 15 stories is a dramatic concentration, that's taking a pretty significant share of what we anticipate to be the market demand within riverfront crossings. Jim mentioned, these other factors as well, in terms of there has been, I think, to anyone living in Iowa City, a real surge in construction, much of which is oriented toward student housing. So it seems to me we're kind of in a situation where there is a real potential for overshooting with lots of unforeseen consequences that could flow from that. The other thing I would mention is, the emphasis in the plan was on, as I mentioned in my letter, on mid-rise. Mid-rise is a far less expensive building type to construct. Now, we're dealing with market conditions, so there's no way in which one can say, well, if you reduce your building costs, that necessarily will lead to a savings that will be passed on to the occupant. But I think it is something we should be thinking about, that these, if we significantly reduce the building costs associated with the project, that would lend itself for that housing to be more attainable to the students, which I think is an important consideration. The rents in the rise, which I think of as sort of our comparable to what we're talking about with 15-story buildings on this site, the rents are pretty high. So, in talking to the manager of that facility, and this gets back to some of the questions I asked Danielle, the units which were three occupants per unit were the ones that were renting out. The ones that were studio and one bedroom had a much higher vacancy rate within the rise. So there are a number of questions I have that I think could be asked about the project. One has to do with, since we know this will be student housing, should we consider a change to the unit occupancy? I know Catlett allows for, it's a different structure in that it's, shared eating facilities, but some of the rooms in Catlett are have 4 beds in them. So looking at the occupancy, which I think our current standards were driven by the idea that I think has kind of informed much of our student housing over the years, and that is we don't want to over-concentrate residents in a particular unit. But this is a different concept here with the residence hall. Another thing I would want us to consider would be waiving or saying that the parking requirement would be a maximum of half. I think it's quarter of a stall per unit. That we could waive the minimum and reduce the project cost and the building height by, the need to store cars on site. Which speaks to me about the issue that we've sort of is peripheral to this, and that is addressing our other transportation issues that I think have not moved as aggressively as our development plans, and that is how do we improve transportation in the Riverfront Crossings district so that it isn't so auto-oriented. If we improve our transit service, we're improving our bike network. Our need, if we're looking at this as a 30 to 50-year building, I think we can rest assured that the concepts that drive our transportation system are going to be very different than they are now. So I'd hate to see us spending, I don't know what the unit cost is per parking stall, something like $25,000, $30,000 per stall, adding to the building cost, adding to the building size, when I think especially since we're dealing with students in this case, in a very close to campus, is that really necessary?
I wonder if you folks have something you want to ask or say.
I just wanted to mention in relation to Rockne talking about the construction jobs, and with all due respect, I see Bill Gerhardt out in the audience with the construction trades. There's more to it than that, though, just saying it's going to provide jobs. I would hope that they would be good, strong union jobs, local contractors, high-quality work, because we certainly don't want another rise incident with problems with the workers and getting paid, et cetera. So that factor really wouldn't play that importantly into my decision on height bonuses. I do really like a lot about this project, especially that it's going to improve the Clinton and Court Street landscape. That's needed to be done for a long time, and I think whatever the design turns out to be, it'll be an improvement over what's there now. Adding green spaces and getting rid of the parking lot. There's a lot of concrete there now, and so that's a very positive thing. I do want to stress again about my question as far as if the height bonuses are all at once or individual, because also it was stated that it's not a by right standard that they would be guaranteed these bonuses. So I would like to see something more of the varied height, like John mentioned, with the taller on the corners and transitioning to 4 to 6 or 8 other heights. It's kind of a blending of the heights is what I'd like to see.
I guess for me, I know people want to live in Iowa City. And so when we're talking about affordable housing, people, aren't here. As many people that would want to be here. So when we talk about vacancy rates, I do believe that vacancy rates will drive the market to more of affordable housing. I'm not exactly sure how much. And so for me, that's where I see vacancy rates are actually a positive thing. And so I do understand, for some landlords that will be a challenge. I hear the concern about the taxes that people will still have to pay if they, don't have apartments occupied or housing occupied. So I do understand that hardship. The one thing that I would like to say is just when developers come to Iowa City, I do believe that we want to make sure that they feel welcomed and that their projects do bring value to our city and what we're trying to do. And so for me, this project for me really is about what Iowa City would like to see happen, and a part of our ultimate goal. Iowa City is a place where people really, really, really do want to live, and I think that this will, if it's student housing, open up some vacancies within the community, bring some more people that's been wanting to live in Iowa City from other communities back, because Iowa City is the hub. This is, where people want to live, and so I can go on and on about some of the positive things that even Jim and Susan and Rockne has agreed upon as being positives for this project. And I think, again, this will, if you're going to, have students downtown, this will open up a lot of student housing. That's a lot. 1,000 is a lot. And so I think it's an opportunity that the city should really consider, or the councilors here. The other thing is when we're talking about the form-based code, and I appreciate John making mention that, is, and even Susan citing that it is not a concrete type of code. It does have some flexibility. And so it was also, in the original provisions that it can go from 8 to 15. And so that's encouraging for me with this project being designated for this site. So I think it is a great opportunity that we really should consider.
Bruce, do you support 15 at all corners?
I do.
Okay.
What do you mean at four corners?
Well, I mean, isn't
Four
that-
buildings.
Four
isn't that-
buildings.
Yeah, 4 buildings, yeah.
You mean the height of, not any variation among
That's
the
right.
building heights, just
Up to 15,
4,
yep.
15 stories,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That's what you understood too, right,
Yes.
Bruce? Okay. Maz,
I think, I can just start talking and repeating everything that what they said about all the benefit that it brings to the city. But, I really like to go direct to my point because, they can just say everything that they said is great and it bringing a lot of value. But my question will be my value will be about affordable housing basis to the building. I really don't like the 10 years affordable housing. I really don't like affordable housing in high-rise building and, students. But because I went and I toured the rise and I found out the difference between affordable room and non-affordable room is just around $40 to $50 only, which is nothing. That you cannot call this affordable. That's why my question will be direct to the developer. I'm going to be really clear. Are you willing to give fee on lieu instead?
I don't know that we can expect the developer to answer right at this moment.
I don't know, but that's going to be my position. Okay, he doesn't have to answer. We're not voting on this. It's going to come back. I'm going to tell you my position. You pay fee on lieu for this. I'm for the 450, for the 15th floor for all 4. You don't do it, I'm not there. That's all.
Can I make a few comments just about overall conversation? And I appreciate all the different views. One of the things is, as you probably know, increasing the housing supply is generally something that student government stands for, that if you're looking at the landlord-tenant dynamic, if we're going to be increasing the vacancy rate, that's going to be helping a lot of tenants out there. Landlords are a few, but tenants, there's a lot of tenants in the city. Around 50% of the population rents, give or take a margin of error. But then I also want to make sure that we're also talking about how is this actually going to serve the people that are actually going to live there? That there's a lot of conversation about building heights. Sure, that's good, and I think it's a valuable conversation. I think ultimately we're in favor of increasing the building heights, but about the kind of what Susan mentioned, the security elements, the livability elements, how is that going to entail? And I'm not exactly sure fully how the student housing bonus height works, but making sure that that's adequate, or if there's things that we can do or conditions that we can do to ensure that security within that building, because that's going to be vital. In addition, I want to mention the affordable housing units that basically the affordable housing units would be accessible to students, to my understanding, that if you are a dependent, 60% or below the average median income of your family, then you qualify. In the same way, you could qualify if you're independent. So that's just some context, at least with the affordable housing units. So I think if the affordable housing units are going to be in place, I think that would be beneficial for students that come from a lower income background, if that's the case, from my understanding, because it's right there. And those are just some points and talking points, but generally, yeah.
But keep in mind, that's only for 10 years. And at the rise, I asked the person, how much is the room for affordable and non-affordable? For affordable was 780. No, for the non-affordable is like regular, 780. And for the other one is 740. Or 42, or something like that. I'm not sure about the exact number, but I don't think that's what we consider affordable, because affordable is to the 80% and below of the area median income. If I were the developer, I would go with 80. Why should I go with 30 or 50? You know, I will go with 80. That's why it's not really affordable. And I think if we get fee on lieu, we can take that money and build somewhere else in Riverfront Crossing, so we can have something like build another building which is going to be affordable and market price together, where we can achieve something. And I'm open to negotiate this. If this is going to happen, really, I will go for that. Otherwise, I'm just laying my value here. You guys do something for us, we do something for you, and that's it. That's how it works.
What I would be interested, and Jeff, can you ask, or somebody, staff answer, with the affordable housing requirements in Riverfront Crossings, they have to have the 10%, but at what income level does
80% and below.
60%. The rise was done before that policy, so the rise was set at 80%.
Okay.
That's what
These would
told me,
be at
80%.
60%.
These would be at 60%.
So there is a difference
It's
between the rise and everything else that's happening with the inclusionary zoning.
Okay, thank you.
The rise is also, those units are affordable in perpetuity, not for 10 years.
Okay. Here's what I would suggest that we consider. It sounds to me like with the right conditions, we have 4 counselors who would agree with the 15 stories, which is what the developer wants.
Sounds that way.
That's correct.
As I mentioned earlier, for me to actually approve that when it comes back, there are certain things that I would want to see, and I guess I think it's important, and I don't know that we can do it tonight, but I think it's important that we lay all of that out as soon as possible for the developers, so as they start moving forward, they can be working with staff and negotiating and figuring out if they can meet those requirements. So we don't sit here and say, yeah, I'm supporting 15, and then they come back and we say, oh, wait a minute, you didn't do this, so now I'm not going to support that. I do not want to do that to any developer. So I guess what I would suggest in the interest of time is, and I just don't think we have time to do it tonight, that we maybe at our next meeting or somehow get get to Jeff some of the interests that we have in terms of, and I mentioned briefly, I think security is a huge interest, a certain concern of mine when you talk about putting that many potentially that many young people, I know it may not all be students, in that kind of concentrated, dense living situation. I think security is a major issue. I would throw out the idea of 24/7 security. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe that's not reasonable. I don't know. But I would like to be able to give those concerns and ideas to staff and have them start talking with the developer and then maybe come back to us with ideas and recommendations of what they think is fair requirements. To your point, Mazahir, with the affordable housing, I'm interested in a couple of possibilities. I would be really interested in seeing some of it on site because there are students who will qualify for it, potentially negotiating that it is longer than 10 years, all right, and then potentially some of that as fee in lieu of, where again, we either build or we work with somebody else where we can make it longer. But I don't think there's anything wrong with having at least some of it on site, but I think that's a negotiation of how many and for how long, potentially.
To your point, too, Susan, this will also allow the developer an opportunity to sort of respond and have the conversation with staff so that they can get the level of detail in terms of what's feasible for them and what's not.
Right. So that's my suggestion.
Let me interject for a minute, though. Don't duplicate what's already in the code. You're talking about security. In order to get the student housing bonus height, you have to have security.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a lot that's already in the code that I don't think you can trump.
Okay.
So, I think the 15 stories is a mistake, but I also see that there are 4 people who support that.
But Jim, I'm sorry, Suzanne said it too also. Until now, I don't know what the developer going to do. My point is clear. If it's not free and low, I'm not going to support this. That's why I don't want the people just to go ahead and do something, and after that, after they do all the work and pay for it and just do all that, I'm going to come and say, That's why I lay out my value clearly and just do this, I will support it.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is you will not support it unless it is all fee in lieu of?
I don't know, it is 10%, right?
Can I just
Sure.
caution you at this point to express your values, which I think you've done, and what you want to see. But the code requires that each proposal be considered and that you have discretion, but based on the quality of the proposal. You have not seen the proposal yet. So I think you've kind of said what's important to all of you, and I think that's fine. But now we need to wait till we see a proposal and move on from there.
You mean the proposal have to meet every requirement that we have from security and all this kind
For
of
student
things?
housing, there is a list
housing.
of requirements that the student housing proposal must include.
Okay.
I do want to make a comment. Now, I'm new to the council, and so I did state that I will support this, which that's where I'm leaning towards now, strongly. I guess that's true to be said. Had I thought about the question that Rockne asked, I probably wouldn't have answered my position at this time. I probably could have been more generalized that I'm, really liking this project. But I think for me to sit here and give my vote, yes, for me personally, I just say I'm sorry and I retract that.
Might make a suggestion. And of course, this would require the development team to be okay with it. But I think I have a pretty good sense of where each of you stand individually and collectively. I think you have a lot of overlapping priorities or goals for this project. Maybe we deviate from the typical level 2 design process. It sounds like you probably do need one more work session, but kind of to Eleanor's point, I think you need something to react to really have an informed discussion. So maybe with the development team's agreement, and I can reach out to them after this if you're in agreement, we could come back to you with a kind of draft proposal that they would put together, walk you through it. This would be a work session. It would not be a formal item, and come back in a work session, explain some general parameters, on how, we would apply bonus heights or, and just get your feedback. That way you're looking at something and it's not a abstract issue like we have right now.
I think
That
it's
sounds-
fine to say, let me just, to you, Bruce, I think that it's fine to say you're willing to go to 15 depending on the quality of the proposal, because that's not saying anything more than what the code already says.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I think Jeff's made a good suggestion, but I want to be clear about my own values on this. I clearly do not support the idea of going to 15 stories with every building. I think it's a big mistake. I can explain why anytime. Not now, because we've already come to a decision about that. But assuming that they're all 15, I think that it's absolutely crucial that the quality of housing for the students be very high. It has to be a place where they can mature safely and thrive academically. That's absolutely crucial, especially in that site. Secondly, Tate Arms, I think we have basically a moral commitment to transfer density for Tate Arms. Thirdly, I agree with Maz in principle about how I would prefer to see most of the affordable housing component be taken care of through payment in lieu of. We'll see what comes our way. And last, I think it's legitimate to have some bonus for vacating or designating the right-of-way. Though, we should be clear, the developers already agreed to do that as a condition of rezoning. And I could tell you a lot more about this. I think we're giving them a huge subsidies by transferring awarding bonuses for vacating or designating that right-of-way as city right-of-way. Nonetheless, that's all I need to say, really. Those are I think, the 4 key points for me. Does anybody else want to address any of this?
I agree with waiting for the proposal from Jeff.
I'm assuming with that, Jeff, that you're not suggesting that they're coming back necessarily with full-blown schematics. It's more,
I
guess I
think
don't
they'll
know.
have, it may not be a final version, but I think they're probably pretty close to having a proposal that
okay,
is ready.
okay, all right, thank you.
Anything else about this, folks?
No.
Danielle, amazing, you're still standing. Last woman standing.
Oh my gosh, it's too tough.
Good deal.
If it had a Fitbit, it would be happy with me.
All right, thanks for the very detailed discussion, council members. Let's move on to the next item on our agenda, our work session agenda. It's to discuss the proposed Taylor Davis Housing Rehabilitation Project. We had some discussion about this, I guess, last meeting. Jeff, I know you've got some thoughts together about what the staff's thinking currently is, given the prior discussions. Can you review that for us?
Yeah, a couple things. You should have in your late handout an email from Rockne, which includes an attachment that I believe was the Black Voices Project.
Yeah.
And I apologize to Rockne. It was an oversight on my part to not have that in the packet. That was our intention, and I missed that. So what I thought I would do is just give you an update on where we're at with this program, remind you what the intentions are, what the goals are for the program, and then I think Rockne or others can explain the information that is in your late handouts. So to date, the South District Home Investment Partnership, you have approved the funding allocation, and that's using federal home dollars. Though home is a federal affordable housing program, the city gets funding every year, and we get to allocate that in different ways. This year, it came up, as it always does, through the Housing and Community Development Commission with a recommendation to have $100,000 for this new program, a program that we have not done before. The intent of the program is to purchase 2 rental duplexes on Taylor and Davis, Taylor or Davis, and rehab each of the duplex units with a $25,000 home investment. So 2 duplexes, 4 units, $25,000 per unit, $50,000 per duplex, if you want to think about it like that. Our goal is to have the resulting mortgage payment, so these would be rental duplexes that would be then turned into homeownership opportunities. Our goal would be to have the resulting mortgage payment, including your taxes and insurance, equal to or less than the fair market rent that is set by HUD. And that differs based on bedroom size. Why we're doing this, again, we're trying to increase home ownership opportunities at affordable price points. There is currently an imbalance of rentals and affordable, there's an imbalance between rentals and ownership in that neighborhood. It's currently about 90% rental. We've also, this is one of the few areas of the city where we've seen stagnant property values over recent years, and we also have a higher volume of nuisance calls in this area. Now, the council may recall a lot of conversation a year and a half or so ago about when we were looking at the rental cap. And at that point, there was a lot of discussion about the balance and the importance of balance of rental and ownership. In that case, we landed on a 30% ownership or rental cap. So again, we're talking about a 90% rental situation here, where elsewhere we've indicated goals to have rentals no more than 30%. That balance, and believe me, we're not suggesting with this program that we're going to get to that 30% level, but the underlying message is that we think that more home ownership opportunities in this area could provide for a stabilizing force in the neighborhood. We want this to be a neighborhood-centric program. We have no plans to offer the program beyond these 4 homes. This is a one-time funding, and I think the only way that we come back and we do this again is if that neighborhood, the residents there say, we want more, city. If the neighborhoods aren't happy with how this turns out, it's not going to continue. So we know that this has to be a program in which the neighborhood buys into, and we know we have work to do to get to that point, that we're not there yet, but we're confident that we can get there. To date, the only steps that we have taken in addition to securing the funding through your authorization is to mail letters to property owners. So roughly 2 weeks ago, we sent letters out to the property owners of the types of units that we're looking to acquire, and just simply asking them, would you be willing to have a conversation with us about selling your property? To date, we've had about 4 property owners that have said, I'm willing to talk, and that's it. We have not followed up with them yet. We're going to give it some more time to see if other people who have received the letter want to call. And then once we know the universe of potential homes or duplexes that we can buy, we will then, the next step will be to sit down with each of them, have detailed conversations about their unit. Is it currently vacant? Do you have tenants in that unit? Have those tenants expressed a desire to leave? Have they expressed a desire to continue to live there? Would you mind if we talk to them about home ownership opportunities within that unit? All those conversations then need to take place, but we have to start by knowing who's willing to sell. Because if you're not willing to sell, it's really no point in engaging in that conversation. After that, you have to identify the pool of buyers. Okay, so we know down the road we're going to know who the sellers are. Now, who are the potential buyers? We certainly want to reach out to any current tenants that have an interest in homeownership opportunities, and we will do that. And then we also want to expand that reach to the neighborhood. And our thought is right now that we would start with just the same neighborhood that we sent the letter to, looking at the property, so the Taylor Davis area. Who else in that area is interested in homeownership opportunities? We'll have to see what the numbers we get, but assuming we get good numbers from that inquiry to the neighborhood, then we have to understand what their capacity is to become homeowners and what barriers might exist for them to become homeowners. We have had discussions already with a couple of local nonprofits about assisting us with that effort. So we're looking at credit counseling and repair for those that might need it. And we're also looking at down payment assistance programs for those that may need a little bit of a down payment to help secure that mortgage. There could be other issues that come up that are barriers to home ownership, and we plan to identify those once we know who's interested in the neighborhood of exploring that. For those that do become, that are eligible and have that capacity, if we're able to remove any barriers that may exist, we'll also think about home maintenance education classes, similar to what Habitat offers, maybe perhaps even working with Habitat on that, where you can learn the basics of home ownership and maintenance requirements that you may not have experienced as a renter before. We do plan, related to the down payment assistance, we do plan to apply to the Housing Trust Fund at their next grant offering for $20,000, and that would be for $5,000 down payment for each of those 4 units. We think that would be a competitive grant application to the trust fund, but if it's not funded, we can certainly look at other options. We also have available to us the voucher to ownership program, which we have some experience with here, but for those current voucher holders that may be in the neighborhood, there is a way to transfer that to a home ownership financial assistance program. So instead of the rental assistance, there's a mechanism for us to approve a situation in which that voucher then helps pay their mortgage for the first 15 years of the mortgage term. And we do have experience with that, and that is a tool that we can use with this program too.
What is that called? I'm sorry.
It's a voucher to ownership program. We've used it, and Steve Rakis is here. He could answer specifics on it, but it sounds like we've used it over 40 times here in the city. We have about 16, I believe, active people that have those ownership vouchers that have converted them from rental to ownership. We are working with local lending partners. We think it's important that we try to have a local servicer of the mortgage, tend to be more flexible with us on terms and just working with folks as opposed to lenders that may not be local. So not only the issuance of the mortgage, but hopefully holding that mortgage locally over time. There are federal dollars involved in this program, and thus there are some more strings than you might be used to, say, with like the university program. There's limits on how much we can invest per unit, so anything over $25,000, depending on the age of the unit, may trigger a higher level of rehabilitation. And also impacts the way that which we can sell the property. So basically there's formulas that HUD uses to determine how much you can sell the property for if you're putting their dollars into it. The individual buyers also have to meet HUD standards for their debt to income ratio. So there's some, barriers that we may not be able to overcome because HUD has those limits, and these are federal dollars. Until we start meeting with individuals, we really don't know how many of those barriers are out there that we can't overcome. Reading through the materials that were submitted, I think that staff is very much aligned with what the suggestions are. There was one thing that jumped out at us that we would be very hesitant to explore further, and that is a situation in which we do a short-term rental, kind of a rent-to-own thing. We really see this as an immediate ownership opportunity. Any type of rental arrangement where you may rent for a few years with the hope of selling it to those tenants down the road, I think you're going to find that the home dollars will no longer be eligible, so we'd have to replace those with some general fund dollars probably. And that also is going to be you're up against the affordable housing location model, which doesn't allow the city to subsidize for rental housing in this area. So there's a couple obstacles to any type of rental to ownership. We really see this as immediate ownership opportunities, and hopefully we can tear down those barriers that may exist that would be preventing somebody from taking up those opportunities. So again, we want the neighborhood to be 100% on board. If we can't get them on board, we shouldn't even pursue this round, frankly. If we can't get folks excited about it and bought into what we're trying to do down there, then we should probably redirect these $100,000 to other affordable housing projects, whether it's in that neighborhood or in the community. I think it's really important for the success of this program that they're on board. There are checkpoints for the council, so we can update you as frequently as you want on this project, as with anything, but you also have to approve the purchase of the homes, okay? So when we come back to you and we're saying we want to buy X property, you're going to have the right, the ability to look at us and say, okay, where are you at with the neighborhood? Have you engaged with nonprofits about these classes? How far along are you? And if you're not comfortable, you don't have to approve the purchase of those homes.
Same with the sale.
Same with the sale, thank you. But again, if those two checkpoints aren't enough, we can come back to you at any time. We would be happy, to another point in the memo, we'd be happy to have a representative of the neighborhood on some type of advisory board that would work with staff through this process. I think we just want to be really clear that it wouldn't be appropriate to have somebody on the advisory board if their intention is to perhaps apply for a home ownership opportunity. So it has to be clear that this individual or individuals would not want to apply for home ownership opportunities. But if that helps us build a rapport with the neighborhood and buy-in, then we'd be happy to do that with this project.
Any questions for Jeff?
I was going to say, maybe if I could jump in, Susan. Jeff brings up a lot of really good points. This is a complicated issue involving city policy, federal policy. I don't think we have any state rules at play here, but it's a complicated issue. So my intention here today was to have a proposal that we received from the Black Voices Project, get it to you with about 2 weeks of lead time, and have a substantive discussion to get a little bit more into the details in terms of sort of which direction we want to go, sort of answering two questions. What do we have the authority to do within these constraints with HUD and our local policies? And two, once that's identified, what direction do we give to staff in terms of the direction we want to go within those parameters? Unfortunately, I learned that we do have a very good screening system in our email system. I sent it on October, I want to say 18th, and I think there was a spam filter or something like that, so it was sent on October 18th. It was not brought, unfortunately, to Kelly's attention until yesterday, and we just learned that yesterday. So normally when we have these discussions, I think in fairness to all of you, when we have policy changes, enough lead time is good, and then also for staff to be able to give the direction. So with that caveat in mind, this may be something that if we don't come to consensus tonight, we may need to have a little bit extra. I don't think it'd be longer than this. I was not intending on asking for another work session, but there are a lot of details here that I do think bear mentioning. And so if we're not able to get sort of the direction that we need tonight, my suggestion is at the end of this that we'd consider a short 20-minute time block, now that we have the memo that we received from Black Voices Project, to work out some of those additional details. So that said, that being sort of the wind up here, Jeff mentioned a neighborhood-specific policy for the residents to improve and meaningfully enhance the residents' quality of life. And so I think what the Black Voices Project we're trying to do is co-create, collaborate in terms of the policymaking aspect of this particular proposal. And they came up with, I think, some good things for us to further explore. A lot of you know that one of my most favorite programs is the University program. I've been pushing now for 2 or 3 years to see ways in which we can improve, enhance, and make sure that we're also using a lot of those principles to different levels of income levels. You've pointed out, Susan, I think very good point. There are some original goals that they originally had in terms of wasn't necessarily an affordable housing piece, but with any good program, I think it evolves, it grows, it changes based upon our community needs. And so what I think, as I understand what the Black Voices Project is intending to do, is take some of those principles that we really love about the University program and see if we can adapt them to some different income levels, in particular the residents here. The concern we have here is not that we criticize staff's great policy work. I think it's a great proposal. I love the direction of it, and I love the intent. I think the only thing here is that once the residents got wind of some of the policy, I think they raised up some legitimate questions. And one of the biggest questions is given that we do have the investment numbers that we do in the University program, can we adopt that principle in terms of the University program? The homeowner, in effect, gets a subsidy of $60,000 for purposes of residence. And I'm not necessarily saying $60,000 in this particular case, but in talking with a lot of the advocates from the Black Voices Project, they had real concerns about whether these residents could qualify for the homeownership opportunity at the 80% adjusted median income. A lot of them, it's our understanding, would more likely be in the 30 to 35% range. A lot of the residents are in historically underrepresented groups in terms of homeownership. So what I wanted to try to explore is really two, I think, really sort of common sense proposals is that, one, Jeff, you've talked about not making sure that we're not approaching or displacing any current residents, and that we'd only focus on empty units for opportunities for purchase. What we want to sort of reshift the focus a little bit and actually identify the residents in those units to make sure that they're the first ones that have that opportunity for purchase of purchasing, that they would go through the credit counseling and everything along those lines, but then they would have an opportunity to have and we could explore the Section 8 homeownership opportunities. But if all those other opportunities were exhausted, that the city would have an opportunity for, much in the way we do with the University program, for a subsidy up to numbers similar to a University program, if that's possible. I don't want to throw out exact numbers, but in the $40,000 to $50,000 range, that would be used as essentially a university. You have to occupy it for a certain number of years, and then if you don't, essentially the city is able to recoup that. So those are some of the things that I wanted to explore in particular. And the third piece of it, we talked about getting more of a homeownership focus. They also really want to make sure that these, and I don't think they'd have a problem with making sure that these would be owner-occupied units, which I know has been a goal of ours for a long time. So a lot of detail, a lot of complexities to throw out here, and unfortunately, and to my fellow counselors, you have not had an opportunity to really digest this, and I guess I can blame the spam filter on this one. But we do have it now, and so hopefully we can have the discussion, maybe not come to the final decision tonight. If we do need to follow up, my hope is that the staff could give us some additional feedback. And my other intention is that we'd also have more opportunity, once it would be an info packet, for other affordable housing groups to weigh in terms of giving us that feedback in terms of where we're going. So that's sort of where I'd like to go in terms of the direction of this program.
What do the rest of you think?
Well, I had a quick question just from Jeff's comments. The interest is in giving, as part of this, is giving home ownership opportunities, if I'm understanding this right, to people who live in the neighborhood. Is that correct?
Correct.
How do we do that legally? I mean, can we restrict the pool of applicants to buy these units to people who currently reside?
Well, we can restrict them by neighborhood. We can't restrict them by race.
Yeah.
Sex.
Okay, so we can restrict by neighborhood, and so in order for somebody even to apply for ownership, they have to have a current resident, say, within the South District?
That's always been the plan for this district,
Yes.
for this program.
Okay, I just didn't know if that was legal with federal dollars, that you could make that kind of geographical restriction. That's
Except if I understand Jeff correctly, he's being more targeted in the South District as a whole.
I think it started off as the South District, this huge area.
Right.
Based on the feedback that we've gotten as this program's been rolled out, it's been clear that that neighborhood needed to be
okay.
condensed. And so what we have to do is, again, if we can start on Taylor and Davis, if we determine there's no buyers that are interested or eligible, whatever the case may be, then we might have to broaden it out or abandon the program and take those dollars somewhere else.
Okay, I just wasn't aware that we could do that geographical restriction to who we would allow to apply for ownership. Okay, thank you.
I mean, I've looked at it from a fair housing perspective. I don't believe there are any home CDBG rules that limit it.
Okay, thank you.
Other reactions? Maz, do you want to react in any way? I know this is an important topic for you.
You mean what Jeff said?
To what Jeff said, and
I just can say, like Rockne, he brought like a lot of good point, but the best point ever for all he said is that if the people who live in the neighborhood are not on board, we don't have to do it. And now we know, most of them are part of the Black Voice Project, and they lay out what they want to see. and that the way that they will be on board if we follow what they said. Not like what the staff, because what the staff said is completely different than what they said. There is some similarity somehow, but, there is many difference. And I just like what he said. If not, people that are not on board, we don't have to do it. And they are, but this way.
Jeff, did you have the Bike Voices Project memo at hand when you and staff were talking about the revised proposal?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One, no displacement of current residents. Absolutely. I mean, that's been we've set that goal up front. And to Rockney's point, if we can work with current tenants, great. So I think we're okay there. The second bullet gets at selecting buyers by race. Can't do it. Okay? Can't do that. We can do it just as we talked, by neighborhood, but not by race. Increase communication and trust between neighborhood residents and city. Yes. How can we do that? Let's have an advisory team from the neighborhood work with staff, and as we walk through the various phases of this project. There is a sample financial at the back of this that suggests that in addition to the $25,000 in renovation, there's a $45,000 city mortgage that would go on a home. That's not within our budget. If you want us to pursue something like that, then we have to go to the general fund and get those dollars, and it probably is going to mean that the federal dollars are no longer eligible. So it's not just the 45 from the general fund. You're probably looking at the 45 plus the 25, if that's what you want.
What do you mean if we just turn this to the university program and do it the same way that we're doing it from the university city? We cannot have the $25,000 from the home fund, federal home fund, to use it in this program?
I don't think so. I'm going to look to Kirk here to mix. Okay.
Okay, yeah,
So
it'll be fine.
25 from home and then 45 from the city general fund?
It would depend on if you're
You can come up to the.
Kirk Lehman, Community Development Planner. It would depend on if you're increasing the amount of rehabilitation that you're doing. So a lot of the additional rehabilitation cost kicks in if you're increasing rehabilitation dollars. If you're increasing down payment, it wouldn't necessarily affect some of those issues that we might run into otherwise.
Sure, that's what exactly I meant. I meant since we've been using the 60 or 50,000 from university program, we can use that portion for the 45, the silent second mortgage, and the 25 from the home fund, the federal home fund, to rehab the houses. Is that going to be legal or not?
I believe it would be, but it'd be something that we'd have to review at the staff level, how we structure that and where we're getting funds from and how we're using those funds.
Sure.
So I can't give you a full answer, but I believe that it would be okay.
Okay, that's what I want to hear.
Go right ahead.
Well, I just want to say that's just direction that we need from council. If you want to move this program up to a 45,000 general fund and 25,000 home fund at these purchase prices that we're talking about,
Yeah.
that's significantly changing the program. We need to know about that. We need to come to you with a financial plan to be able to do that.
Sure, we can ask.
Would that be roughly equivalent to what the University program is doing right now?
The University program invests all of its funds in rehab.
Yep.
Okay, so we have a cap of 60, and we try to maintain that cap. Sometimes we come under, sometimes we come over, but that's the goal. There is no down payment program or second mortgage program with the University program.
And what I was it's a complicated issue. That's why I'm hoping that we can come a little bit of a consensus. Staff will dive deep into this, and then hopefully we can revisit in about a month for a very short work session.
No, but Rockney, really we need to hear. I really would like to hear from everyone so we can give the staff direction what
I
to bring
agree.
to us next time.
Well, I think financially, it sounds like a better deal to follow the university program, but as Jeff mentioned, I think the really important aspect of this program was the home ownership and down payment assistance, which isn't in the university program, and I think that would absolutely need to be included.
But it's the same, Pauline. We've been giving 69 houses this money in a way that they rehab the house, and it was free money for them. Now, it's the same thing, even though it's not going to free money for them, because if that person sell the house, this money coming back to the city, the 45. Same thing. But in addition to the 25, is the federal fund is there. We are not going to look for it. It is there, 25,000 home fund, the federal home fund, to rehab the house. We just taking that $60, using it different way. Instead of like rehab with that money, we're gonna do it like a second silent mortgage, which is never gonna be like for them for 30 years. It will be paid back if the person sold the house. But still, we are not doing more than what it should be. Same money is going anyway. It will be either for rehab or fee for just like the second mortgage. That money, it will go away.
So this is being talked about as a silent second mortgage. What we're really saying is they're not making any payment on it, and the city will only get that money back when the house is sold?
Yes. Because we are not getting, if we the university 60,000 or 50,000 that we're being using it, we are not getting it back, because even 13 years, if they sell the house, I guess, I don't know how many years, 5 years, right? 5 years, if they sold the house, they have to pay a portion of it, or if not, after 5 years, they don't have to pay it back. But if they sell it before 5 years, they have to pay it back. Here, you can do it 30 years. Not only like 5 years.
Well, I guess I'm going to assume this money is going to be coming from our affordable housing fund, because this is for affordable housing.
No, this is the university program. I'm proposing, Rockne, if I understand you right, you are proposing it as a...
It doesn't have to come. I mean, my point is if we have the fund and alternative sources, we're saying if we are limited, that could be something that we could have it come from. But I think the point is if there's other funding sources, why wouldn't we tap those sources?
I might just jump in. What I heard Jeff say is that tear down barriers that exist. And I think we're probably getting a little bit too much into the particulars of this program. We just saw, staff come up and say, this is a possibility. So I don't think that we need to, I think, Rockne, you made the point very clear about the direction. I think, and I'm hearing, essentially, we want this for the Taylor and Davis, and we want it to be affordable. And I think that's where we give it to the staff and have them come back and say, this is the proposal. Now, I am afraid that along the way, we might need someone from council to, and I don't know if you said that you'll be given like updates before this is on the next work schedule or work session, but if we can have some participation from, maybe an interested council member that want to make sure that it's actually going in the direction that we intended it to, so that there is some communication, then I think that we can get to where we ultimately want to be. And some of those barriers will be discussed. Staff will come up with suggestions. So I'm very encouraged by what staff has said today and what Jeff has said. And so I'm very encouraged about this program, that it will meet the needs and the purpose of what we want to do.
Jeff, what's on your mind there?
Well, a couple things. One, I think the idea of the silent mortgage, we're assuming we're assuming we know the extent of the barriers by just plugging in $45,000. We don't know what the extent of the barriers are. What I would say is, until we know what units are available, what price they would be, the type of rehab we need. We can't really build a true pro forma to where I can tell you what the rent levels may be. What I can tell you is, just by eyeballing it, what we've looked at is that we think that we could purchase units and get the mortgage payment, again, including taxes and insurance, below the HUD fair market rent level. And then we think that we can supplement with, existing tools to get folks there. We won't know that until we know how much the duplexes are going to cost, and that's which ones are available. And then again, how much rehab dollars, we put into that. All those things are going to make a difference on the ultimate pro forma. That's why I'm saying, oftentimes when we come back to you with that purchase, we'll have a lot more clarity, and we'll also have talked to potential buyers too, to understand, again, what some of those barriers are and what needs to be done. Maybe it's a second mortgage, maybe it's some other type of assistance that's needed.
So my sense is that Jeff has laid out a pretty good strategy for responding to the situation and taking into account the commentary we've gotten from prior discussions and from the Black Voices Project and so on. The adjustments have been good. I also agree with Maz to a degree, to an extent. I think we should strive to have approximate equivalence between the funding support provided by the university program and the funding support provided in this particular instance. How to do it, I don't know. And frankly, I don't want to try to be parsing that out right now. I think we should ask Jeff and staff to think about that, come back to us with specifics, and then we'll have that in front of us. We can see if there's any decision we need to make on the specifics.
I like that, Jim. I mean, so using the university as a principle and give the staff with the details.
Yep.
Okay, so you want us to come back to you to show how we're going to do this by investing $60,000 total in each
Plus $25 from the home fund.
So 25 on top of the 60?
No, I don't understand that at all. I want it roughly equivalent. And if we're putting 60,000
Okay.
into a university program, a house,
Fair enough. 60,000, not 50 or 45. Yeah. Okay. Same thing. I guess we're gonna end up.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Sound good to me.
I think
any
that
further
works.
discussion?
No.
I do have a question. Is there any value on a council member, touching base with staff, or are we going to be getting some type of update?
The only problem with that is
I
we
don't
couldn't
think it's
provide
necessary.
detail. And we couldn't provide direction because we're only one council member, other than like a
Get it
liaison
back.
role.
Okay.
We're gonna
All
have
right.
it.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay, we can move on to clarification of agenda items. And we have time to do this. Okay, so
I would like to briefly highlight 10A from correspondence. That's the KCRG news report about Martha Witchert and the issue that we've had with duplex. If I could bring that up at this point, Jim?
yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I want to thank Stan Laverman. As you may recall, I was at the point of possibly calling for a work session. But before we decided to do that, Jeff agreed that it would be good for me to meet with Stan Laverman, and so we're able to sort of drill deep into some of the particulars of the duplex concerns that we'd had. And for the people out there in the audience, to give you a little bit of background, there's been concern about one of the homeowners, Martha Witchert. She's been very public and open about her advocacy, and I think she raises a number of very good points. And in response to that constituent concern, I thought maybe we did need to have a work session on this particular issue to see whether we would need to. I talked to Stan, and we had a really good discussion about the principle, and in particular relating to a permanent barrier between units for duplexes. That was one of the primary concerns. Talk with Stan was a really good discussion of the history of some of our housing policy in Iowa City, and in particular, sort of the way in which the post-World War II generation with the GIs in the 50s, the city started sort of changing the way they rented a lot of the inner core neighborhood units. And so you had a situation where a lot of single-family homes all of a sudden found themselves cut up into 3 units, 4 units, duplexes, and they were really never designed as such. And so as part of our discussion with unrelated occupancy, one of the things staff did is say, hey, why don't we clarify and strengthen some of our existing principles? There were some new rules, but some of it, and in particular with the duplex, was really a strengthening and clarification of a longstanding principle, which was if you have a duplex, you have to have a permanent barrier. And in talking with Stan, I think the key point is this, is that she would be able to do identically to what she's doing now if it had a single-family permit. The issue is she would not be able to have as much occupancy with the single-family permit. And so after looking at that and talking with Stan and really understanding her concerns, which I think are legitimate, I do think we need to stay pat. And I do not think we need to further develop this issue. One of the things I was looking at is whether we could do a tightly crafted sort of mom and pop exception, for 1 or 2 units. But as Stan has pointed out, in terms of some of the properties that we've had difficulties with, sometimes mom and pop we have some of the same difficulties. And so I think strengthening, and if we have rules, we do have to make them generally applicable, and we have to be consistent. So, Martha, if you're listening, I'll follow up with a phone call. We'll talk about this in greater detail, but I feel very comfortable with how we've handled it. It is at core making our neighborhoods livable and having consistent rules throughout the community. And it's hard to do that if you start crafting out exceptions. I think as we deal with these new rental permits, maybe we'll have to look at some changes, but I think for now, I think we can stand pat. So I thank staff for that position. But I think certainly if there are any other policy tweaks we need to make, I think we do remain open as a council to evaluate them. But in this particular case, I'm not supportive of that.
Okey doke. Other agenda items? I want to mention one, item 6M, which are the minutes of the Telecommunications Commission's September 24th meeting. When I read through those minutes, I found myself thinking they don't really know what we have been talking about in the past with regard to broadband, et cetera. Ashley, you're shaking your head like you.
Yeah. I just wanted to let you know that we did get an update. I just got an update shortly before the meeting started from Ty Coleman about their most recent meeting. So they have some questions about what is expected of them going forward, or the form that the commission should take, or what they should be covering. So we're going to respond at a staff level to those questions, and I can share that with council, or so you'll be hearing more about their discussion and what they're thinking before they give us a proposal.
Okay, so I have a suggestion. One of our pending work session topics is to meet with the Telecommunications Commission, and we've chosen not to do that up to now because they only had 3 members.
Right.
They now have 4.
Yes.
I suggest we meet with their 4-member commission and provide them with as much clarity and direction as we can. Is that agreeable with you folks?
Yeah.
Okay, so we could do that at next meeting or the one after that, or whatever is convenient for them.
Okay.
What would you like in terms of staff prep for that?
Well, Jim,
well,
didn't this sort of come up? At some point, I had evaluated the concept of municipal broadband.
Yeah.
I think it was either you or Susan brought up the point, well, before we look at municipal broadband, why don't we really make sure we have a sort of a good sense of where we are now with municipal our broadband service in general before we look at alternatives or those sorts of things. I think there's a very good point that you made. So I think as part of that, we wanted to then to reach out to the commission, and I think they had reached out and said, hey, we should weigh in on this before you do the policy change. So I would say sort of where we are now in terms of broadband service, because we do get a lot of complaints about it. It's a big issue. The question is it anecdotal, or does it reflect something in which the city could, in some meaningful way, improve and explore different options? So I don't know if that's
your
enough clarity.
recollection is consistent with mine.
Yeah.
That's the way this topic emerged. Yeah.
I think what's changed now is that there are no longer local franchises, and that was the original purpose and the stated purpose in the code for the Telecommunications Commission was to administer the local franchise. So they don't even have really a direction by code now. So even setting aside municipal broadband, we kind of have to figure out what role that you all would like them to play.
This could be their new task, right?
Yeah, well, the question would be, can we, what possible directions could we provide in discussion with them? What could emerge in terms of what the priorities or topics, purposes of that commission should be? Or disband the commission. I mean, we don't want to waste people's time, so if there's no real purpose, we should disband the commission. We're not required to have it. It's the way I understand it. Is that correct? It's not a state-mandated commission?
No, not at all.
Yeah. But
I'm wondering if it would make some sense to ask the members of the Telecommunications Commission to identify what aspects of this area, telecommunications, publicly provided telecommunications, they think it would be good to have citizen advice on, or resident advice on, or something to that effect before you have that meeting.
That sounds reasonable to me as well. I mean, they should know more about it than a person like me does, anyhow.
They know more than me.
So through, based on the email with their own questions, they're looking at whether they're questioning a formalized commission in some other capacity, or if they would go to an advisory board type status. There are questions about what other advisory boards are in play in the community, one of them being the Climate Action Commission that disbanded and has that status, the Bike Ped and Advisory Committee. So that's one thing, but they asked, has council expressed any vision or ideas? They are familiar with their topic, and what I'm going to share again with them is that they should provide some type of memo or proposal as to what their, the topics that they might cover in whatever capacity they would suggest.
Yeah. After, I think, staff educates them on the history of that commission and why their mission, as articulated in the ordinance, doesn't exist any longer.
Right.
Okay, that sounds clear enough to me. So we will proceed along those lines. Other agenda items?
I just want to talk about corresponding 10B about the lack of sidewalk. I just want to ask maybe the staff, when we have new division and existing area, who really pay for the constructing the sidewalk and make it maintain it and keep it clean, whatever? Usually
When we have a new subdivision, the developer would pay the cost of building a new sidewalk.
And here in this case,
We have an infill program in which before that was a code requirement for developers to build sidewalks. So in those areas where there are no sidewalks, we do periodically go in and retrofit those neighborhoods with sidewalks, and that's a city expense. That's an expense that all of us taxpayers pay. It's not an assessment to that neighborhood or that property owner. Oftentimes, those are not met with open arms. In some of the older neighborhoods, they prefer not to have sidewalks. So in this particular case, I think we've tried to engage that neighborhood before, and the neighborhood has not been, as a whole, very receptive to new sidewalks. Yeah.
okay.
I have a couple items. Item 8H, which has to do with amending a prior contract to provide engineering consultant services for the Idlewild Stormwater Drainage Diversion Project. I don't have any objection to that, but Jeff, I wonder if you might be able to discuss that briefly if I pull that item, or if any one of us want to pull that item from the consent calendar, not to change it, but just so that members of the public will know that there have been conversations with Idlewild.
Yeah, you just want an overview of the project?
Yeah.
Specifically what's
Yeah,
being
I
reduced?
want the public to know that we have been responding to concerns expressed by Idlewild neighbors, and how this particular project fits into that.
Sure. Yeah. Ron or Jason can handle that.
Okay, so I'll ask to have that pulled from the formal meeting.
We don't
from
need
the
to pull
consent
it.
calendar.
You don't need
Well,
to
that's
pull
true,
it,
we don't
just
have
on the
to.
consent calendar,
So
just ask them to
yeah,
explain about it.
Thank you, yeah. Okay, there's that. Item 8M. This is a resolution authorizing Strand Associates to provide engineering consulting services for the Dodge Street functional design. I understand that, have no objection whatsoever, but what I do wonder is whether the draft contract calls for consideration of alternatives pertaining to roadway width, lane width, design speed, all those things that we've processed over and over again. I didn't see it when I was reading the material, so, Jason?
Yeah, Jason Hobble, city engineer. So the intent of this contract is to really be the first look at the project, kind of look at what the existing condition is, what we want this to be in the future. Really, the outcomes of this would be to give us a better idea of what a cost estimate and what a design might look like, and then in the future, we would move forward with preliminary and final design. So I think at this point, we're really just taking a first look at it, and certainly we would have, as part of that discussion, what we feel those lane widths should be, bike facilities, sidewalk widths, that kind of stuff would all be part of this process. But really, it's just the first look to give us a better idea of what we would need for funding and overall scope of the project. This one is especially important because it would be a joint project with the DOT and what that split might look like for that project.
I guess for me, and maybe other council members, it's pretty important because Dodge Street, as we all know, cuts through residential neighborhoods.
Yep.
And as a result, it's important to make sure that it functions not as a barrier, but as something, a roadway upon which people drive not more than 25 miles an hour, ideally, and bicyclists can use, and what else? A few things like that. I mean, we've talked about this a lot, so.
Yeah, and I think that certainly would be part of the conversation.
Okay. All right, good, thanks. Okay, we have enough time to get into the info packet, unless anybody else have any other agenda questions? Okay, so question or anything about the info packets, October 18th?
No.
I didn't see anything in it.
Not the 18th.
We'll jump past it. October 25.
Yeah, I have IB4. Actually, no, November 1st, no.
Okay.
Hold on. I guess I do.
Oh, do you have something, Mazza?
I thought IP6, something Jeff put in there, the difference in the poverty rates when you exclude off-campus students was very significant. I think ours was about 13% difference. So it cuts our poverty rate from 28% down to 15%.
Right.
So, which doesn't surprise me at all. I think it's something that we ignore a lot of the time. Certainly there are some of those students, and I don't know how they do the calculation, but so many of those students are actually dependent upon their parents, and their parents' incomes are sufficient enough then that those students do not fall within that poverty rate, which is really what happens.
Right, but I think that's a good point, though, Susan, and I think as Gustav pointed out earlier, there are some of them that are considered the low income, and even their parents' income is low. So I think that's important. I think a lot of times when we're talking about affordable housing, earlier discussion of 12 Court Street, it came up quite a bit as far as the students and needing also low income, and I think we oftentimes forget about them as needing affordable housing also.
I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, IB4, Sunday transit. Yeah. I guess from the memo that the city manager, we asked him to bring us this, and I guess everybody saw is like with Barra Transit, it will be like almost 1,800,000. I'm really just saying, if we can look at the 2019 physical budget and try to like start Sunday transportation, even if partially. We don't have to do it like all route. We can just go ahead and do it for like we know who's the people who use it Sunday for work. We know which busy route that maybe we can do it the same thing like Saturday route, or even less. I'm just really proposing that if we can, that's something we can think about to do it for 2019 fiscal years and before the study.
We could think about it. It's very expensive. It's very expensive in revenue per passenger mile because the ridership is so low on Sundays. And so you got these expensive buses covering routes that would not have many riders.
And from where you get your data, because I think I know a lot of people who use Sunday in certain route. They use Sunday. They need it. Like they go to Sunday, they work at Sunday, or that's the only day that they go around.
Yeah, well, the staff would be more expert at this than I am, but I think the facts and experience shows the revenue per passenger mile would be much lower, and therefore the cost per passenger mile would be much higher on Sundays. But I don't know, we can consider it, but exactly how, I don't know, because you're suggesting some, very limited use on Sunday service.
Yeah, I mean really very limited use for like certain areas, for that is really needed. And we talked about this last time. That's why the purpose of asking Jeff to bring this, and I just highlight it, because he did this because I guess Bruce has some interest, and I don't know if I'm mistaken, John also was asking the same questions. And if we have it, why don't we just start really thinking about limited services?
I think limited services is probably zoning in like maybe fixed routes limited to transporting people to work. I think that can kind of narrow the zone and give us some area to focus on.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I think the challenge is the data. I mean, where the people live and where do they need to get to work and what times, and that's going to be part of what we do in that transit survey. I'm just not sure how we can get that kind of data in the meantime to be effective.
We can do a survey in some neighborhood that they use Saturdays services.
Jeff, what were you about to say?
The same thing Susan did, just crafting that service in a short period of time is going to be tough. Our staff position has been that this is part of the RFQ that's on the street now. It's been issued. We're waiting for responses from consultants. They're going to give us a comprehensive review of Sunday service and what it looks like, and that's when I think we pull the trigger. It's not as simple as just putting a couple of buses out there. There's a lot of labor infrastructure that goes behind that. You've got to have mechanics on site. You got to have supervisors. You got to have bus drivers. So it takes quite a bit of undertaking to launch a new day of service like this. I personally would rather do it with the benefit of the comprehensive data that we're going to get from the study. And the other thing is, if you start a service, it's really hard to take it away or modify it. And you might find that if you start a service, say, in 12 months, and then 6 months later, you learn that the service would be designed, a different level of design to that service changes. You're going to have people that have now become dependent on that Sunday service that it's just going to be hard to move those routes along. So I continue to urge you to wait until we get all of that, and then we can look at the system holistically and look at, later shifts on weekdays, Sunday service, fares, transfers, low-income discounts, all those types of things more holistically.
Yeah, I think that's what we ought to do. What do the rest of you think?
I agree at this point. And I think the thing is, though, is that in the meantime, we do have the Transportation Committee that's been meeting in some contexts. I think is a private group. They're not an official city group. But if there's any solutions or proposals that they have that would also meet the ADA as a targeted interim measure, they could send those to us and propose that to us. But at least I'm not comfortable with it because I don't want to have a lot of empty buses on these routes, and we may disagree about whether they are going to be empty or not, but I think certainly in the evenings, we know that there's a lot of empty buses, and we want to make sure that the resources that we use are used in an optimal way. But if there is an interim proposal that someone can come up with that would meet the ADA, because we also have to provide the paratransit, we could consider that. I mean, I'm thinking off the top of my head, someone says, hey, could we partner with some of the taxi and Uber for some limited funding? I don't know, beyond the scope of this discussion tonight, but sort of my thought.
I understand that it will be like a lot of work for the staff and a lot of new things gonna happen, as everything that Jeff just said. But sometimes our people in this community deserve it, because they are paying taxes. They are doing, they deserve it, I guess. They deserve to have that, and they deserve that the staff to work hard enough so we can just give them services. And I think everybody here say, just trying to say, from my understanding now, the way that you talk about it, that it could be limited people using it. And I'm sure 100% you guys don't have any actual data saying limited people. I work with folks who need it, and they always talk about it. I work with the group that you're talking about, the community group. I work with Jermaine and everybody. We talked about it many times. And I know the needs. I've been talking to the people. I've been talking to the hotel association. They said they need workers, but the workers all the time say they cannot come Sunday because there is no transportation. I'm still going to say we need to try it. We need to at least do a survey to find out the actual data. And if we really find out it is okay for the staff to have more work, that's okay. I don't think because of that, we don't have to provide Sunday transportation.
We need to stop in about a minute. Does anybody else have anything you want to add?
Kind of on the relation to transit, I just thought it was the IP2, the article that Bruce included about the bus transit systems that are offering free service for doing squats. And of course, I don't think that would work for us because we don't have the ticket centers. But we do have a lot of people who use the bus rack or the bike racks on the buses. And I thought maybe that would be something we could look at, as offering them free transit if they ride the bus to catch, or ride their bike to catch the bus. And maybe that's one thing we could also look at, is offering them free transit if they're riding the bike and putting their bike on the bike rack. I think that's one good thing.
I would just say, because I know we only have 30 seconds, I think transportation is worth looking at. People out there do need the transportation. The comprehensive plan that's going to come back for transportation is probably going to be a year before we even see any action. And so, when we're talking about making advancing people financially, a part of getting to work is a part of it, and also for businesses who need those workers, that's a limitation. So,
we're going to come back to this.
I think we're going to have to come back to this. It doesn't sound to me like we have full resolution, so we're going to adjourn the work session, come back after the formal meeting. We'll pick up this particular topic. We stopped as we were discussing Mazahir's suggestions with regard to IP number 4 in the October 25th information packet. My recollection, to kind of cut to the quick about this, was that the real question was whether we should await the staff's and consultants' preparation of a transit and public transit route and schedule study forthcoming, or try to do something in the immediate future, sometime this fiscal year, with regard to providing some degree of public transit service on Sundays. I think we need to wait for the transit study. If I knew that there was maybe one route that clearly would help a significant number of people on Sundays get to and from work, I'd seriously think about that. And there may be such a route. I'm not aware of it. So I don't know what the rest of y'all think.
I agree, Jim. I think, we've got that in motion. I realize it's taking longer than people would like, but I think people have to understand that this is not a simple process of, gee, just roll a bus out on the street. It's having maintenance people available. It's having service people, customer service for call-ins if there's problems, et cetera. If you set a fixed route out there, it immediately brings seats into the conversation because of federal law. So it's much more complicated than I think most of us realize until you really start getting into the nitty-gritty. And so I think we need to wait for the only other comment I would make is we've talked a little bit, and I've mentioned this before, the idea of vans or some other things. If people want to work with that transportation committee and bring back some other viable options to consider for, and in cooperation, I think, with employers. I think if employers are having a problem because of Sunday workers, then let's get them on board to partner with us in terms of, van service or something for their employees. I'm open to something like that, but I'm not open to us trying to, in the middle of doing a major project here of getting actual data, of trying to throw a bus out on the road or two or three and really have no idea where they're going to go or what kind of ridership we're going to have, because I think the needs are so spread out across the city.
I would agree, and I think you point about the possible interim solution. I know that Transportation Committee has been meeting for a long time, so if there's a proposal that staff gets the input on and we get it in a work packet, I would consider that.
I would consider it as well.
As long as we have the ADA piece of it, I'd consider that.
I think, if it's possible to go that route.
I think the Transportation Committee, they do surveys, they don't provide solutions. But I think we can start by, you guys just don't have the data, and I just see like you think there is no need, maybe.
No, I think you're misinterpreting that. I don't think anybody's saying there's no need. We just don't know what the need is or where it is, and
then we have to find, instead of saying, we wait. Why don't we start figuring out if there is need or not? Like those the Transportation Committee can give us the data of if they done something for Sunday transportation, and we can start from there. If we find out there is one route or two routes that really need it, we can just start providing that. If the only thing that you guys lack of is the data and making sure, as just the mayor mentioned, if there is really one route really needed. And if there is a great need, the sooner is the better. I just think that.
If they can give us good data, I'm willing to try and consider some interim solution. Yeah. I'm very cautious about an actual bus route because, I don't think, because we're not involved in the nitty-gritty, I don't think we truly understand the complexity and all the things that go into putting a bus out there on the road. If there's ways that we can partner with employers through some interim manner, potentially with vans or something like that, I am willing to consider that and try to explore that to meet the needs. But we need data.
The complexity is going to be the 800,000 that he told us about it. That's what it costs, everything. To put bus there, to put everything.
I think we've already heard 4 people have expressed a view about this. Pauline, and you have as well. Pauline, do you have a view?
I was just going to say, I like Susan's idea about the van. That I worked for the industry a number of years, and of course we have people that commute from all over the place that come at all hours of the day and at night, and they've got a very successful van system, employee van system. And if we needed to get other employers to model it after that, if it's ACT or the motels or whoever has the number of employees, that they could get together and have some sort of a van service. That would be a start. It would be something. Or even Susan had offered an idea a while back about vouchers for the taxi cabs in the meantime. If we could, even look at something like that, that wouldn't be the $800,000, but it might be helpful to people that would need something in the meantime.
Bruce?
I respect everything that's been said. What I would say is this, as far as I think everybody knows that there's a need. In the perfect world, if I was to make a quick recommendation, what I would suggest is there be letters sent to employers that is distributed, essentially to take a survey to see who would really need busing services. The issue that I think that we face is that the comprehensive, the plan that's going to come back is going to be a year from now. And I think when it comes back, it's going to be where we are today on a lot of levels. And so, I don't know, $800,000 to me doesn't sound like, it sounds like a lot of money. And where it comes from, I think, when we're talking about giving people access to work and supplying employers with jobs, I think is worth it for our community. So, I guess Johnson County Livable Community Transportation Committee, that's the Transportation Committee that meets not as a city committee, but independent. And so, I think I heard if someone, presented a proposal, maybe that's something that can be done through them.
I think I clearly heard 4 people expressing a preference about how to proceed. And I think Maz, and perhaps you, Bruce, and I'm not sure about you, Pauline, don't fully agree with what the 4 people down here said. Does that sound fair? I mean, that's what I heard. So we operate on a majority rule here. So with regard to, tell me if I'm wrong about this, because I'm trying to be clear about 4 people supporting this. I think what we're saying, Jeff, is that we want you to proceed with the study. We don't want to spend, $800,000 this fiscal year to provide Sunday service. But we do want a careful look at maybe some possible ways of providing some kind of service on Sundays for key numbers, key possible connections, and it could be funded partially with employer assistance. There are ways to proceed, I don't know, but some limited assistance.
I would suggest this, Jim, since we do have that independent transportation committee, I would let them come back to us with data. I think the staff has so many things on their plate with our whole strategic plan and with everything else. I think that committee has already started doing a lot of work, and I would say let them gather that data and bring it back to us and see if there is some way of connecting with some employers to do anything temporarily before we get the whole.
John, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the key is trying to understand what the need is and then see where we go with that in terms of what our options might be.
Rockney?
I'd agree with that.
All right, Pauline? All right, so there are 5 who agree with that. Bruce, does this sound reasonable to you?
I respect everything you all have said.
Okay, so we're clear about that, Jeff? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. All right.
I just wanted to bring
other
up.
items?
Yeah, IP.
On October 20th.
Yeah, IP7 is the meeting schedule of January through April. I just wanted to mention the March 19th, which is the 3rd Tuesday, which is when we would normally meet, is spring break week. So I
we'll have to revisit
I
that.
think we may want to consider adjusting that one.
I probably won't be here, so it'd be good to revisit.
What you are saying?
Just one October 9.
March 19th.
March 19th. That's during the university's spring break, and some members of the council probably won't be here on that date during that week. So
Lots of people tend to, and just community members even tend to travel and stuff.
Yeah, so we'll just have to, choose another date. It's not a big problem. We do it all the time.
On that same item, just note that the date, it said Tuesday, the 16th in January for the budget session, and it was corrected, I see, in the November 1st posting, because the 16th is actually Wednesday. So
is it on the 16th?
So
That's
it's
right.
Wednesday, the 16th, because we have a council meeting on.
Yes. Okay, I want to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding.
Right, but that
With
was
regard
correct.
to IP8, the KXIC schedule, So it's great to see that it's filled out for the next 7 months or whatever that is. But when I look at it, I see that John and city staff are both scheduled for 3 visits with Jerry at KXIC, and I'm only scheduled for 1. I feel like I'm not pulling my own weight, so I'd like to find some way to kind of shift around. And
3 for me?
Yeah.
Maybe one's already taken place, I would imagine.
Well, the list shows your name 3 times.
Oh, that was
one
the
on
October, though.
Halloween.
That was a previous,
Halloween.
that was
Yeah, there
previous
was one on
schedule.
You have 2 more.
So I just want to make sure I'm pulling my own weight.
Okay.
So maybe you and I can talk about that.
Yeah, I gave up my last one to, I think Latasha Deloach did it because it was a conflict with the Human Rights Breakfast. I was supposed to do that one, and so I pawned that off. So, but that's, I still have a couple, one on there maybe.
Okay. IP number 9, aid to agencies, emerging agencies audit policy. I think staff needs some guidance from us on this.
You just asked us to report back to you on what we would recommend for an audit policy. If you recall, the discussion was we're trying to fund new nonprofits that may not need or have the resources to conduct a full-blown audit. So this is kind of an interim step that we can take. And the memo outlines our reasonings for landing there.
Yeah, it calls for a very light hand in terms of audits for emerging agencies, right?
Well, the idea that it matches United Way's policy, I thought makes a lot of sense, so people aren't having to do things different ways for different agencies giving them money. So
Yeah,
I thought it
so-
makes good sense.
It looks pretty reasonable to me. But on that point, I have a technical issue to raise. Now that when I'm trying to copy material from some of these packet items, sometimes I can do it just by selecting material and then I copy and paste. Other times when I do that, it won't let me. I have to do the snapshot tool. And other times when I use the snapshot tool, nothing appears when I try to paste it. So I don't understand technologically what's going on. And maybe somebody somewhere sometime can look into that.
And you're just trying to copy from the, downloaded PDF?
Yeah.
It's just not in a writable format, I think.
And
Just
it,
need to
and
make
it
a
varies
conversion.
unexpectedly. That's the thing that catches me by surprise, and so maybe somebody could take a look at that. Anything else on the October 25th?
Yeah, I have IB 6. I guess from the memo that the city manager attached it, when many college students live off campus, poverty rate goes up, which is, just look at it. I want to highlight it that if you look at Iowa City on the back, this will give you really, if we exclude students, it will give you really low rate of poverty, which will give us some kind of things to solve other problem like affordable housing and all those kind of things. So
I don't fully follow you, Maz.
did you say this?
Well, yeah, I know what you're referring to, but I'm not sure I follow you.
It say that when they live off campus, which is gonna live with people anywhere else, if the poverty rate right now is this high, we count that. Just keep in mind that we count students who live there too.
Right.
That's what I just wanna say. And students don't stay there forever.
Yeah, so
They
if
come and go.
students are counted, the poverty rate is something like 28%, and if they are not counted,
And
it's
it
like
is
12.
go down.
15.
Exactly. That
Okay, right.
I just wanna highlight.
Anything else in that packet?
IP 11, the correspondence from, I'll murder that name, Agnes Kettner, about the Riverside Drive, Myrtle Avenue, the bridge, and I did see that in the November 1st packet, Jason did reply to her about that. But in follow-up to that, I was just wondering, with the pictures and driving by there all the time, is there something we could do to clear that path, get that overgrown stuff, so that until, it's going to be almost a year before we actually are able to get the tunnel under there, and people are continuing to walk there, and I think that is a really big safety concern. But if we could just maybe look into cleaning that growth up a little bit in the meantime, or making it easier to walk through there?
We don't want to encourage anybody to walk there.
Yeah, yeah.
If you wanted to do something, I would suggest we try to barricade it so you force them to the
So they
intersection.
can't, okay.
'Cause
Liability.
if we're really inviting traffic there, one, it's not ADA accessible, and two, it doesn't have any of the safety accommodations that we would normally. So I know that she was frustrated by our response to her, but really, that's the whole reason we need to kind of build the tunnel, is so we can do it correctly and meet all the standards. We really shouldn't be doing anything to encourage pedestrians walking there. It's not safe.
They've been doing it for many, many
know,
years, so
yes.
yeah. Okay.
This, let me collect my thoughts for a second. This kind of, I guess, reminded me, or kind of is part of a larger conversation with walkability for intersection safety, or in terms of sidewalks, and are they actually exactly paved all the way? It's a slightly different, but I know talking to students, this has been this is a concern, like with a lot of intersections, or like, for example, on North Dubuque Street, there's one of the sidewalks, there's a mud that will slide down onto the sidewalk the way it's kind of landscaped, and then a lot of people slip in that area. Or, for example, I meant South Dubuque Street, but then on North Dubuque Street, there's not really any intersection, for example, for students to, or residents to cross by. So you have one on Market Street and then one all the way down on Church Street. And there's a lot of housing over there that they try to get onto campus. And many individuals will walk that intersection pretty dangerously. But it's kind of a comprehensive issue. So I was wondering if there's any way we can look at this in a comprehensive way, whether it's and relates to in the downtown or in the near area on that intersection safety and sidewalks safety, if that makes sense.
What we could do is just set up a time to talk with you and get some of the better understanding of some of the areas. We may have some of those plans. We do have several intersection improvements that are either underway or planned in the future to help address some of the higher risk situations that we know of, this being at the top of the list. So maybe we start with a meeting.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay, anything else on the October 25th packet? All right, hearing nothing, November 1st.
I'd like to bring up IP5. The mayor put in a PowerPoint from Rakeisha Harrington regarding youth services here in the city of Iowa City. And, I feel like the trip that Jim and I took to the South, sort of the trip that keeps on giving in terms of policy, in terms of experience, in terms of, it's always nice just to see how other cities do things. I think one of the things that really jumped out at Jim and me during our trip was the city of Birmingham's Youth Services Division, which really incorporated youth employment, youth education, youth supervision. And so obviously Birmingham's a much bigger city than the city of Iowa City, different resource base. But I think Jim and I were really captured by the policy innovation that the city had sort of put together, and hoping that in one way, shape, or form, we could hopefully learn some lessons from that program. And so we had, after the trip, sort of had a discussion, well, gosh, should we send some staff down to Birmingham and or maybe should we invite some folks from Birmingham up here to hopefully have an exchange? And, that takes an invitation and an acceptance. The Rakeisha report, I think, was also very helpful in terms of this discussion, because as Jeff and staff should be doing is that anytime we have a proposal, it's always good to look at all of the different programs that are already available to make sure that we're utilizing those programs. But that said, I still think we can learn something. And so I think it might be a good idea for us to encourage an invitation to at least the leader of the Youth First program in the city of Birmingham. I know that Community Service Office Henry Harper has really identified this as a key need, and he's also aware of a lot of the various youth programming available. But so I think that'd be good for at least us to have that conversation. It may be that we decide that we don't need to, adopt any new program, but I think that should be something we should really take a look at. So I don't know, Jim, if you wanted to have any input on that or thoughts along those lines?
Well, I do, yeah. Part of what we thought about after being down there was that it would be good to have someone on our staff learn about the Youth First activity, learn more about it. So that's pretty much what Rakesh has done. And she's also related that to youth-related activities sponsored by all sorts of organizations up here. Part of what's not entirely clear for me in Rakesh's work is whether there are clear recommendations at the end. Maybe she wasn't asked to come up with clear recommendations, but I don't really see them at the end of the PowerPoint. And I think it could be fruitful, and I would support Rockne in this. It could be fruitful if we could do it to invite perhaps the director of Youth First in Birmingham to come up here and take a look at what we're doing, talk to various people, perhaps provide some advice based on their experience. I remember one thing in particular, Rockne, that really affected me, and that was to see the simulation. Do you remember the simulation of a conflict between a young couple? They happen to be African American. It could be of any race. Having a conflict over stuff, how stuff just bubbles up in relationships. And it quickly became right on the verge of being very violent. So it could have resulted in, some physical assault of one on the other, and who knows, somebody's in jail next thing you know. But we saw the Youth First people were helping them to learn how to scale back on those kinds of interpersonal conflicts. And they have all sorts of other stuff going on down there that really affected us when we were talking with them, listening to what they're doing, talking with police officers, talking with the director, I don't remember his name, and so on. So if it's possible, I would support Rockne and say it would be good to invite someone from Youth First up here to meet with us and other people who are providing youth-related services and see what can come out of that.
One of the things I found interesting in looking at this, and it's something I've talked about before, is, and I don't know how their Youth First programs run, but the appearance is that it's, they all have the same starting name, Youth First, and then it's whatever it is, it's art, sports, whatever. And when you look at ours, and this is one thing that's kind of frustrated me for years, it's a hodgepodge. Mm-hmm. We've got the City Rec Department, we've got the Dream Center, we've got G World, we've got the YES program, which I think is run by 6th Judicial District. I don't know how anybody finds what they want. And like I've mentioned before, I looked on the Secretary of State website one time, and there's like 500 and something nonprofits registered in Johnson County. I don't know how many of them are still active. But to try to find some way to have this more organized, more of a central location, whether for people to go to find these resources, even if I'm not saying the city needs to provide all the resources, but somehow to get some coordination between the city and the nonprofits and anybody who's providing these various services, so it's easier for people to find out what's being done, and for people also to find out maybe where the gaps are that they might be interested in doing something, or to help coordinate between different organizations. Because you look at the list of things that are being done in this community, and there's a lot. Some of them I wasn't aware of, and most of them I think I was, but it's like, how does the average parent, and particularly somebody low income, busy with 1 or 2 jobs, not really connected with stuff, how do they find any of this stuff? So trying to help them find a way to connect this. If we have, I'm thinking to the meeting we went to, South District meeting, okay? So how do you kind of coordinate and pull together this information and get it to the different neighborhood associations so they can put it in their flyers or their what's that next door neighbor app that people use? Just
next door.
yeah. So I'd be really open to having some discussion about how we could improve that. And then I think once you can do that, then it's easier to see what the gaps are and try and figure out.
Just compiling these organizations and.
To start with, and then figure out, then it's easier to figure out what are the real gaps and how can we, either as a city, through Parks and Rec or through nonprofits, how can we find some programs to fill some of those gaps? But also helping people find what's there.
Yeah. Any further discussion about that? Jeff, maybe you and I could follow up on that.
Yeah.
But not tomorrow, because I won't be here tomorrow. Pauline won't be here tomorrow either. So that's done. You're free.
I'm free.
You're free.
All right.
Okay. Item number 6, IP number 6. This is a memorandum from Jeff and Tracy Heitschuh about 225 and 229 North Gilbert Street.
I would say yes on the request for information. Let's find out what the community might want.
I'm inclined to agree too,
Yeah.
but the basic question is, should the staff issue this request for information about the possible commercial uses of these two properties, knowing that the buildings themselves will be protected by historic landmark status and so on? So that's the real question for us. Are we okay with the idea of sending out an RFI? I'd never heard of that before, but anyhow, RFI, with regard to possibly using these buildings as some kind of commercial space.
I think it makes sense. It doesn't commit us to anything. It's just getting information at this point of how
I've
people
always
might
liked
use them.
there's already adaptive reuse in that area, so I think.
Right, it's kind of in the heart of a commercial uses.
Yeah, and it's zone CB5 as it is, so.
You could think of the RFI as just a very informal RFP, but likely what would happen is if we did an RFI and you felt like, yeah, there's some good ideas here, then we would do a more formal RFP probably and get firm proposals from whichever groups and proceed a little bit more formally after this. This should only take 30, 45 days. Just really raise your hand if you're interested, provide us some basic information about the framework that might work, and then we'll go from there.
It's a great idea.
Have you sort of run this past historic preservation people, maybe the commission or?
Not
Jessica
beyond the
about it?
staff, knowing that it shouldn't, either way, we're going to protect the homes, and that process is.
Yeah, I would think it'd be
get started.
okay with them, yeah. But I don't know, it's just a matter of.
We'll make sure they're aware and, yeah.
Okay, any objection to doing that?
Nope.
Okay, so you can proceed. Any other items on that?
Yes,
in
I
that
have
packet?
IB4, pending city council work session topic. I just want to talk about number 3, exploring expanding use of racial equity toolkit within city government, whatever. I guess I was like really reading what happened at the HCDC about the Taylor and Davis in the beginning. After that, somebody suggests that they can use the equity toolkit, the racial equity toolkit, and when they used it, they really come with like very awesome ideas and different idea from the one that they used it before. I'm just like, since this is here, I just want to see, or maybe I really would like to see the racial equity toolkit being used for everything from now on, and just to make that happen, I just want to ask the city manager or the staff, like, what do we want to do as a staff to make that really happen? Like, using it in every single thing, so.
Jeff, because it's on the pending work session list, I imagine you're thinking about getting to that at some point. I don't know what you
Well, we are. I mean, Stephanie leads a group of departments. We did it with 4 or 5 departments in the first year. We've got 4 or 5 new departments that are going through it, and I may be a little off here, but we look at 2 existing policies and one new policy, and we take them through this. And then we've applied it on kind of an ad hoc basis for other things that come up. It certainly is not part of every decision we make. We don't put it on every council agenda item that's coming your way, every board and commission. The wheels would turn incredibly slow at City Hall if we did that. We just don't have the time and the resources to do that for every decision that comes your way, or even that we make administratively. So I think part of what, this is in the top half of this pending list, which is these items really need some council direction before staff goes forward. We need to hear from you what your expectations for us are in using that tool. Are there certain areas, are there certain policies or programs that you want us to run it through? Otherwise, we're going to continue to do it kind of department by department on the issues that staff think are most critical.
Buzz, I hear you brought this up in the context of possible work session topics. Should we schedule a work session?
Yes.
3 months out?
We have, just to kind of update you on our tentative schedule right now, because this came together after this packet was published, for your next meeting, we plan to come back to you with Emerald Ash Borer information, which we're already about a month behind. We previously told you we'd get that to you in October. So Julie will be presenting on the Emerald Ash Borer, and then December 4th, we have the consultants for the solar study coming in. So we're really into that second meeting in December now, unless it's a shorter item. And January, most of you have experienced the January budget. You're pretty much
pretty busy with that.
All budget in January. Not that we can't have other topics, but it gets pretty busy.
That's what I was thinking, like 3 or 4 months out. I don't know what people think.
Well, I guess, part of it too is if staff is already adding 2 or 3 departments or 3 or 4 departments a year and taking them through it seems to me like they're already trying to expand it throughout the city in a manner that I assume Jeff and the rest of the staff feel is doable without slowing everything down to the point of not getting things done. So I guess I'm not sure, Jeff, what you feel you need for direction from council necessarily. I mean, it sounds to me like you're implementing it at a pace that you feel like is doable, yet keeping things moving, but getting more staff used to doing it.
Yeah. The tool's really good. I mean, it forces you to think, right? It forces you to just spend more time on it and ask some questions that you otherwise would just skip through. So what we're hoping is by going department by department and forcing them to go through this form, which takes considerable time to go through and process, we're hoping we're kind of building a different mindset. So in the future, the finance department, Dennis is gone now, they did the pilot last year. They're not necessarily in it this year. They're not going through with that form, but what we're hoping is that their experience with that leads them to pause internally, ask some questions, and that policies that do come out of the finance department this year, there's at least been some thought. So we try to keep the conversation alive within the walls here, hoping that just becomes the expectation without necessarily having to go through that formal process. But again, if there's particular areas you want us to focus on, let us know, and we can absolutely do that. For instance, aid to agencies or different program like that we offer. We can absolutely zero in on something like that.
But to Susan's point, I think even if we're already sort of making the progress, I think in terms of deliberating in terms of where we're at now, I think would be very healthy, even in just terms of daylighting it for the public in terms of what we're doing to making sure that we're doing everything we can within our resource and budget constraints in terms of racial justice and racial equity. So, and I know that we should almost rename this Kingsley's Equity Toolkit. I felt like he felt we were going in the right direction before he left. So at least that he didn't bring it up too much as a concern. But that said, I think it's something that we'll never be able to do enough, and we should always strive to do as best as we can. So my thought we should still at least have it on the agenda so that we can have a work session.
I just think if we're really going to the right direction, that means the sooner to do it is the better. And you guys have it here. That's one of the things that I really love it when I start seeing the strategic plan, action plan that you guys have, and just to slow things down. even if we really want to make this city like for everyone, working for everyone and more inclusive, you need to use that. Even if we want slow, and the habit of like the people start using it, the sooner to start it is the better, so they can get it, and things will start after that because they're being trained for this. Things will start moving forward like faster. I don't like really mean next work session or maybe even the end of the year work session, but the sooner is the better to really start thinking about this. Maybe right after the budget. Like on February maybe, or whatever, when the budget will be done. I mean,
I'm not sure I'm fully understanding you, but just to be clear, we have been doing this for the past 2 years. We've been applying the racial equity toolkit.
We report to you in info packets, at least, quarterly on the progress of those. So we can, I don't know when the next one comes back out, but we can make sure and call attention to it next time it's in the info packet. And maybe that's a good time to go through it.
Yeah, that would be a good way to do it if next time that comes out, which will be fairly soon, exactly when, I don't know. And then we could make suggestions about what to look at next and how to improve it over time.
We can make sure that next update also includes a recap of the previous years. So you get a sense of what we did last year too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still, I really, what did you recommend?
Well, Jeff was just trying to summarize.
Stephanie provides quarterly reports to the council on our progress with the racial equity toolkit. I think the next one should be coming. Do you know, Simon?
Yeah, they were revamping the look of it a little bit. It's the equity quarterly reports that she does, and a component of that is an update on the equity toolkit. There are 4 departments going through it this current year. Right now, they're working on what those programs will be. It's the Housing Authority, Library, Parks and Rec, and Fire. And just right, previously we had several other departments go through that, and we can provide you an update on how those projects went and maybe long-term impacts on those departments.
But I understood from him, we are not doing in every department or every section.
No, we started with, I think it was 5 or 6 last year. We have 4 undergoing it right now, and each year we roll it out. As we become more experienced at it, as we become better at it, we are disseminating it throughout the organization.
That's what I really recommended, to start using it for every single thing. The first thing that I said, and he was saying this will slow us little down if we start doing it. And I still gonna say I really encourage the city to start doing this, and I encourage the council to push for this. This is really important, and it's working. We've been seeing it, and we would like our staff to be trained, and after that it will be common sense for them. They don't have really, and the sooner it's the better.
Sure, and I can say, especially Jeff brought up the finance department going through it last year, that this year, as we've been going through policies or even budgeting, that you can tell that it's really impacted the way discussions happen early on within the department. For instance, the utility donation program that's part of our budget now came out of that program last year, came out of the toolkit.
And I guess I want to be clear about when I say it's slowing things down. When I talk about the toolkit, I'm talking about an actual form that we fill out that takes time to compile. It's not the same in my mind as stopping, pausing, asking a question before we advance a program, but it's a very comprehensive analysis that takes place. Even the departments that we're rolling it out in, they're looking at 2 to 3 policies. These are departments that make dozens of decisions every week, much less forward stuff on to boards and commissions and councils. So we kind of need to know that line that you set for those expectations. Are you talking the day-to-day stuff? How we're securing goods and how we're directing employees out in our parks and on our streets? Are you talking only things that are coming to city council? That's where we need our guidance, because again, right now it's department by department, and then staff picking the programs out that we think would benefit from it the most.
Okay, that's why we needed a work session sometime, so we can give you the guidance.
We can focus attention on it when we get the report from Stephanie. Maybe in that next report, she can highlight the racial equity toolkit part of it so that we can really focus attention on it.
Okay, sound good. Can I go to the last one?
Yeah, sure. What?
Yeah, the last one is IB10. It's Scott Boulevard School Children Crossing Concern at Washington. My understanding, we are the one who asked for this survey, I guess, as a council, and it's a date, I mean, and it's here. It just say like they have report for the public, and here's it is sentence again, until and unless safety features are added to this intersection, police encourage children to use Court Street intersection to cross Scott Boulevard. And the last sentence will say, we are communicating with the city council regarding this issue, and we will proceed under its direction. I would like to know what your direction going to be on this, or are we really going to do something?
Well, I had concerns about this item, too. I mean, it seemed, my recollection was that this was something initiated, I think, by a member of the community,
Yes.
right? To look at the intersection, and the response was not going to do anything. We encourage you to walk down to Court Street. I don't think my sense is no one's going to do that. They're going to continue to walk at Washington. So I'd really like staff to look at that intersection a little bit more seriously in terms of what could be done to improve the safety. I mean, there was a comment about, well, if we brought a guard down there, they may be at risk. And that suggests to me, we've talked about this. Scott's a 35-mile-per-hour zone. If we allow, as we typically do, 5 miles over that speed limit, that's 40 miles per hour. We also know that if a pedestrian is hit at that speed, they'll likely die. So, I mean, I did a very preliminary look. I mean, one example of what was done further down Scott is a pedestrian island in the middle of the roadway where near the park there, which is a mid-block location. And we also have a similar island on First Avenue. Maybe, that's a wide street. It's over 30 feet wide. It may be possible to insert a pedestrian island there to at least allow a person to only have to worry about traffic in one direction rather than two in order to cross the entire roadway. Anyway, that was just, it seems to me something beyond, we encourage you to walk.
I think you could go up and down Scott Boulevard and find that same intersection all over. Lower West Branch is just north of there, and it's the same uncontrolled.
Well, absolutely.
So where do we, I mean, at some point, the scope of the project starts to grow to the point
it's
where
a corridor problem. I agree with you.
It is a corridor problem, and
so,
it's replicated on a number of streets, and that's, I know, something you all have talked on, and we're trying to chip away at ones as we can. I think our message back on this one was focusing just on that school traffic. We're getting a handful of students across Scott Boulevard to Lemmy, which is an elementary school. Next year, it appears that those students east of Scott will not be districted to Lemmy, so we shouldn't have a Scott Boulevard school crossing situation. So is this now a top priority where this intersection is going to get all of our focus? In our view, it's not. In our view, we have other roadway issues and pedestrian safety issues that would be at a higher be higher on the list. And it's partly because we know that crossing of Scott Boulevard's only got a few months left in it unless there's drastic changes in how the school district appears to be redistricting.
Well, as we've talked about this before, there are a number of arterials running through Iowa City, like Scott, which in essence become barriers between neighborhoods. And so it is a citywide issue. This seems to be one example. Gustav, you mentioned Dubuque. Dubuque is another. So that they're all over Iowa City. Anytime we have an arterial running through a neighborhood, because of the distances between regulated intersections, meaning signalized or all-way stops, it can be challenging for pedestrians, especially vulnerable residents, children, elderly, disabled, to cross the roadway. So,
Okay, we're not going to be able to solve this
No, we're
problem
not, but-
tonight. So the question is, are there 4 people at this table who would like to instruct the staff to do something different from what the staff has recommended?
I am.
I don't. I'm okay with what staff is recommending. The rest of you?
I am as well for now.
I'm okay.
All right, so that's at least 4, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. Okay, with everything.
Okay. Anything else in that information packet? Okay, the last item is council updates on assigned boards, commissions, and committees. Let's try to be brief on this. What I would like to suggest is maybe somebody could talk about the MPO. I don't know. I saw a report out there, John, but, has the MPO met in the last month?
I'm trying to
No?
remember.
Okay. Okay, so never mind.
Coming up.
Are there any major things anybody wants to say about any of the committees, et cetera, that we're involved in?
Oh, just me real quick.
Sure.
Just about the Invest Health group that I'm a part of. Jim mentioned I won't be here tomorrow. I will be leaving for Atlanta, even though our two-year grant had ended. They're reconvening the 50 cities for a conference in Atlanta. National experts and leaders are going to talk about advancing health and equity and strategies for investments, and hopefully get some innovative ideas for financing projects. So,
Okay, I hope that goes great.
I hope so.
Fight and everything. Anything else? If not, I think we're done with our work session. Yeah? Okay, work session's over. Thanks, everybody.